Hello, Funk McLovin here. Over the years on Patreon, I've posted several exclusive essays and lectures about Homestuck. Now that I'm trying to get away from just Homestuck stuff, I wanted to post these discussions on YouTube. This video will feature several different topics, and if you're only interested in one or a few of them, look in the description of this video and pick the one you want. I'll be splitting this up as chapters. Also, big news! This video has a sponsor. SONICLUXARTS at Etsy.com.
Are you ready to install your destiny? Get ready for Swerve, the mind-bending, world-ending non-game, now on the Game Bro and Game Bro Advance. Load it up, connect with your party with Link Cable, and experience the most dangerous co-op session you'll never actually play. Swerve is playable. You can play it. Swerve, the game that's already here. Available now for Game Bro and Game Bro Advance. This product does not reveal industrial-induced diarrhea, alcoholism, public time distortion, depersonalization, character death, induced depression. Buy now!
If you go to Sonic's store right now, you can order one of these Spurb cartridges, or one of the other cool pieces on the site, such as Pride Badges, charms for Homestuck and Hive Swap, as well as some cute House MD charms, and Sonic charms of the Sonic characters in Homestuck God Tier outfits. It's seriously cool stuff. And not that expensive. The pins, I think, are like $6. That's a good price. And without further ado, here are the essays. Hello, gamers. It's me, Funk McLovin. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's raining outside. A little bit of rainy ambiance while I talk about something pretentious. Also, my cats are fighting. Sorry if you hear that. Today I want to talk about Homestuck and the Soul. This is something I've done a lot of thinking about because I think about the nature of the human soul quite a bit, and Homestuck has some interesting takes on the soul that I think is worth talking about. First, let's establish what is a soul, as it were. So to start this off, I want to read a quote from Mark Twain's short story or novella, The Mysterious Stranger. This is towards the end of the book. I would recommend reading it yourself. It's very good, very wonderful. Read the illustrated version. It's on Project Gutenberg. Maybe I'll link it. And you are not you. You have no body, no blood, no bones. You are but a thought. I myself have no existence. I am but a dream. Your dream, creature of your imagination. In a moment you will have realized this. Then you will banish me from your visions, and I shall dissolve into the nothingness out of which you made me. I am perishing already. I am failing. I am passing away. In a little while you will be alone in shoreless space to wander its limitless solitudes without friend or comrade forever. For you will remain a thought, the only existent thought, and by your nature indistinguishable, indestructible. But I, your poor servant, have revealed you to yourself and set you free. Dream other dreams, and better. This is a quote from the character Satan, speaking to the main character, I think it was Theodore. His name doesn't come up a lot, but again, very good piece. And what Satan is saying here is that Theodore is imagining everything around him. He is a product of his own consciousness, that his real self does not exist in terms of bones and muscles. Now, there's kind of two interpretations of the Mysterious Stranger, because the mysterious in the book, Satan has driven people insane before, so it's possible that he is attempting to drive the main character of the Mysterious Stranger insane. But I believe that Satan is trying to instruct about the nature of the soul and what it is. Because the soul, as we experience it, is something that is so self-evident to us, and yet completely invisible to others, either viewing us or viewing them. And the soul in this case I refer to as like your own consciousness, your own being, the thing that feels when you touch something. I don't think I have to explain what a soul is. I think it's very intuitive, especially for those who speak English and maybe have a passing familiarity with Abrahamic religions. But as it relates to Homestuck, Homestuck contains many interesting takes on real-life metaphysical questions, and the soul is one of those. In real life, the soul could be understood as the consciousness existing independent of the body, as I said before. The unique self. In other words, I am me. I am not you listening to this. I take it for granted that I exist and you exist, but we have our own ideas. That was really fucking loud. Sorry, I'm drinking a LaCroix. When I taste the LaCroix, I feel it. And when someone else tastes a LaCroix, I do not feel it. I might see, the LaCroix passing into their lips. I might see them feel refreshed, but I do not feel in and of itself what that feels like. The soul is what separates yourself from someone else, and it is also yourself in its entirety. Though the soul seems in some way self-evident, in other words, everybody has a contiguous consciousness, there is some gray area to be explored with the soul. Outside of experiencing it directly, it is actually quite difficult to prove the soul of others or even yourself. You cannot prove that you exist in a sort of logical sense. It is perhaps, in fact, all that you can take for granted, but you cannot prove it in yourself or others. The soul is not a logical thing, and yet it is one of the most fundamental aspects of our very being. Now, breakthroughs in science in the future might lead us to discover what the fuck the soul is, or if there is no soul, or if it's all just an illusion. But for right now, I'm going to refer to this general mystery as the soul. We could imagine a few conclusions from this idea. The fact that I have a soul and I can feel mine, but I can't feel your soul. We could be solipsistic, like in the Mark Twain quote that I just read. In other words, we are all dreamers imagining our own reality, and none of this is real. And no one else truly exists, we are just constructing them in our image. We could think of transience. In other words, the soul is sort of this transient thing that passes into other beings and can be experienced in myself and then pass into another body, which is sort of a, reincarnation is popular in many things like Buddhism and Hinduism. And we could also imagine discrete souls, right? I exist as me, and then when I die, my soul goes somewhere else. Now, in Homestuck, the soul is something that is not necessarily shared by people who are the same person. And this is interesting to me, because I am obviously different than you listening to this. I have a different body, I have a different mind, we have different fingernails, we have different experiences and histories. But some people in Homestuck have the same experience, maybe even the self-same experience, without being the same person. An example of this would be Dave and Dave Sprite, who they exist as the same person with a diverging timeline. So they are the same guy, but we experience them as discrete souls. What I'm saying is, if Dave saw Dave Sprite drinking his LaCroix, he would not himself taste the LaCroix. He has a different body, a different experience, etc. So this is a case where the same person does not have the same soul. However, there are also examples in Homestuck where different people have the same soul. In other words, for instance, Jade in her tower on Prospect versus Jade on Earth. These two Jades have different upbringings, different histories, different pasts, and though they have the same body, they do share a soul. They don't always share memories, as it were, but they do experience the same consciousness. And when Jade goes God tier, she becomes one person in herself, in her dream self. These selves kind of combine. And I think that's interesting too. So in other words, if Jade sleeping drinks a LaCroix, Jade waking experiences this as a dream. She would taste herself the LaCroix even though they are different people. I'm getting a lot of mileage out of my beverage choices here. What does this mean for the soul? Well, it means that the soul, as we can conceptualize it, is not exclusive to us, as it were. In this way, Homestuck is saying it believes that the soul is a transient thing. It is something that passes into other bodies and is exclusive to us in some way that is not personal. And that extends into when they discuss, connecting with things like the void, or Calliope having a consciousness in her of itself, and then her muse self having sort of this more expanded consciousness. We can see this as the soul being a bounded circle. It is something finite, indestructible, and I suppose transient, as I said. Some other examples of the soul kind of dichotomy here is John and Dead John. They have the same experiences but a different soul. Dead John dates Vriska, but the real John, or the Alpha Timeline John, does not. Pre- and post-retcon Vriska actually have conflicts very significantly. They do not share a soul. They harm each other, quite a bit. Dirk and Hal are very different creatures, and they don't share a soul. Dave and Dave Sprite I already mentioned. There are a lot of times where people meet themselves, and I talked about this in my YouTube video, Homestuck and the Self, in a more general fashion. The soul in Homestuck seems to be attached to a body, but not a person. So in other words, let's say I could take the soul out of John, put it in Jade, and then switch them around. This soul would not share the memories of Jade, it would not share the memories of John, and they would likely continue as if nothing had happened. The body in Homestuck is the thing that experiences all of its own experiences. And the soul is a consciousness that is outside of this body that can be rearranged as needed. For instance, when a character goes into the dream bubbles, they experience no actual motion, even though the dream bubbles are a real physical place in space. They are something that are set up by the Eldritch Terrors for dead people to occupy. When you die, you don't move. Your soul is just transferred into the dream bubbles as a sort of holding zone, and when you try to leave the dream bubbles as a dead person, you evaporate. You're gone. Now, a real person can go into the dream bubbles, and in fact, it's often that it does happen. John and Rose go into the dream bubbles and actually meet each other in a strange way, because time and space don't entirely work the same, but this is a real physical space that they're existing inside of. And so in this way, the soul is a kind of reference point, I guess you could say, that people experience, and you kind of accumulate experiences as a soul, and then you can be transported, as it were, to this afterlife. Compare this to the Christian idea of heaven, where you are transported to a different place when you die, a different plane of existence, maybe a different dimension, maybe somewhere high above us. Your body remains on Earth, but you rise to heaven as a ghost, essentially. I think this is a compelling notion, and I actually would say that this is what I personally believe about the soul. Maybe not in fantastical terms, but I believe the soul is some kind of actually enduring consciousness that only inhabits your body as kind of a temporary measure. And I don't know if that's comforting. I don't know if that's like strange or existentially fucked up. I've seen a lot of theories about what happens to your soul after you die, because I think any conversation about the soul kind of goes back to that, right? What happens when you die? In Homestuck, that is kind of an open question, because the afterlife is constructed by mortal beings who can be killed, in other words. It's constructed by the eldritch terrors for the dead dreamers, and they can be killed again in dreams. Now, where does the soul go in this case? Well, there's kind of two answers. If it is destroyed when someone experiences double death, then probably oblivion. And if it persists after death, then it's unknown where the soul really goes to. There's no answer in Homestuck proper. I guess the question is, do God tiers or dream selves share souls with their original counterparts, or do they just share memories, or what? Again, this is an open question in kind of a compelling fashion, because I really enjoy the idea of where does the soul end and the mind begin, and where does the mind end and the soul begin? I believe that everything is connected to these three components of ourselves, right? We have a body that is very mundane, a mind that exists in the body that is more complex than the sum of its parts, and a soul that exists in the mind and the body that is more complex even still than the sum of those parts. And again, that's something that's kind of self-evident or intuitive to someone who's alive, but it's very difficult to prove this. And I like that Homestuck, at least maybe on a subconscious level, Andrew Hussey grapples with these ideas. He compellingly explores them. That's all I have to say on the matter. I don't think Homestuck offers us an answer one way or the other. And again, the mysterious stranger kind of brings it into stark relief about how the soul is this blank thing that is just floating within all of us. This is probably the most pretentious discussion I've ever made, because I don't have a lot of answers, and I'm kind of just speculating about a concept that is basically one of the most well-trodden concepts in all of fiction, all of media, all of human thought. But I think it's important to reckon with the soul as someone who potentially has a soul. If the soul doesn't exist and we're all mundane creatures, then I think there is no point to existence whatsoever, in that it's hard to explain. I think there is no purpose to existence in an absurdist sense, like it has no inherent value. But by the very fact that I am alive, I think that creates some kind of value, you know? Again, this is something that I've never really articulated, and it's something that I've only thought privately about, and it's only recently that I've realized that Homestuck has some insight into this, in the way that it plays with the idea of the self versus the soul as two different things. Again, maybe not on a conscious level by Andrew Hussey, but he at least thought about how characters should act if they have the same personhood but different experiences. Like, what if you meet your clone? I don't know. So that's all I have to say, really. If you have any comments, I'd be really curious to hear them. Maybe uniquely so in this episode, based on what kind of preconceptions people have about the soul. I used to be kind of a really big atheist on this, essentially rejecting the idea of a soul at all. You know, not believing in the soul either as a real concept or a spiritual concept. And I still don't really believe in the spiritual soul, but I used to just think that, you know, we're all mundane, nothing creatures made of mud. And I don't think it's really possible to believe that, given the just experience of being alive, having memories, and a consciousness. And I think believing that is very convenient, because it kind of escapes death, you know? If you believe that nothing exists, that the soul is not real, that you yourself are not real, then you don't really have to die. You escape the notion of death itself, and I think that's very convenient. Because if you ignore the evidence that you are alive and that you have some emergent experience, even if that is only driven by your own body's mind, if you ignore the idea that you might have something transcendent within you, well, you don't have to really die. You're not really losing anything. And I think it's obvious that when you die, you're losing something. And, you know, we're all trying to fucking escape our own deaths, but I don't know. It's important to humble yourself in that way. But anyway, that's all I have to say. I've said that 3 times now that it's all I have to say. I clearly have more things to say, but I have to cut this off at some point. It's been 20 minutes. I hope you enjoyed. Again, very pretentious. I'm sure some people will laugh at this, but I really enjoy the topic. Thank you. I'm going to drink the rest of my LaCroix now.
Oh, that's good.
Hello, everybody. Today, the court is in session. Bang a gavel. Bang, bang, bang. Court is in session for the trial of Tavros Nitram. Now, what the fuck did this little boy do but kill Jade's fucking grandpa? Now, if you're not on Twitter, which if not, you know, blessed be to you. Good job. You missed a bullet there. But there, a couple years ago, there was like this fucking weird discourse around Tavros, particularly by people who liked Vriska, about how Tavros was like an evil guy for various reasons. And I want to run down his rap sheet because it's funny. And I want to cover this stuff because a lot of people forget the facts and they might not remember stuff. So, number one is like a meme by now. The Tavros is a chaser bit, which is spurned on by the 2 women that Tavros shows interest in are fan on trans girls, right? Jade and Vriska. Now, this was fucking... This point was blown out of proportion. This was made as a joke, right? This was made as... I don't remember who made the joke initially, but it was a joke about like, oh, isn't it funny how all the people that Tavros hits on are trans women? Even though they're not trans women in canon. So Tavros is a chaser. That was never real. Or at least, I hope to fucking God it wasn't real. If it was real, God help your soul. Whoever came up with that. Anyway, that's the first thing. We're just going to consider that out of the way. Tavros is not a chaser. If you don't know what a chaser is, that's fine. I'm not going to explain what that is. Because if you don't know what a chaser is, your life is so much better. You're so much better. Anyway, the second thing that I do want to talk about is Tavros's killing of Grandpa Harley, which is like the main event. This was going around on Twitter 2 days ago, I guess. 2 or 3 days ago as of recording. God knows how long ago as of posting this. But Tavros's thing, you know, oh my God. Did you guys hear my cat? Anyway. Tavros's thing in discourse in like, I don't know, 2018, 2019, 2020 was like, okay, well, he's actually a bad person because he killed Grandpa and then started hitting on Jade. And I really love that because, you know, this is he did kill a guy. Like, we're not here to litigate that, right? He did kill a guy. That was not a thing that he should have done. But there's some context here that people are missing when they say, oh, he just started hitting on Jade. And I want to talk about that. So we're going to talk about that. That's his rap sheet, killing Grandpa Harley. First of all, we should establish what is the question being asked here. Because the question, like I said, is not, did Tavros kill Grandpa Harley? Because he did, right? The facts are very plain. He used mind control to control Beck, which in and of itself is kind of weird, even though Beck is a stupid fucking dog, to kill a man, a human man. Now, true, he did not know that he was killing a, you know, sapient person, not like an interloper on Jade's Island. He didn't know what the fuck that was, and he didn't know that it would kill him instantly. But he wasn't sorry for killing him. And that's what's important. So he did kill that guy. That's not under debate. Let's talk about what is under debate. Because what is under debate is essentially, is Tavros a bad person for doing this? Now, let's ignore the very important fact that people who love Vriska let her off the hook for a lot of stuff, such as, consistently needing to murder people to feed her Lucis, killing Tavros, who is the subject of this video essay, killing, a bunch of other fucking people. So let's not talk. Let's ignore that, because that is not Tavros. We're going to be incredibly fair. Tavros's rap sheet has nothing to do with Vriska's rap sheet. But I'm just saying, in a world like Alternia, the fact that this guy is has one of the lowest body counts canonically, that's kind of, it's weird that there's so many people out there who think he's like an evil guy. It's funny. It's funny to me. So is Tavros evil for killing Jade's grandpa? Let's look at the facts. You can be kind of evil in two senses, right? You can be evil in the, you are an evil person and have evil intentions way, or you can be evil in the, you are evil and do bad deeds way, right? And I don't think Tavros is either way. What I mean by this is there are people who they hate the world and they're evil in the sense of their feelings, their deep dark feelings, kind of like light Yagami. It wouldn't matter what they did, they would hate the world, and that would make them kind of repulsive. But they don't do any crimes. Light Yagami did do crimes, is a bad example, but you get what I mean. They feel in their hearts that the world is wrong and evil and bad, etc., and they want to do evil things to do that, whether they do or not, whatever. And then there's the evil sort of presence. This could be anything from, a guy doing evil things because he thinks that it's for the greater good, like Javert from Les Mis, or it could be, an animal just fucking around and killing people. And this is an evil presence because he kills people. This has no respect for, the feelings, just the actions. So it's kind of like feelings versus actions. And I think that on both counts, Tavros is off the hook. Let's talk about his feelings first. What are his intentions of killing Jade's grandpa? His intentions are essentially to save Jade's life, actually. A lot of people forget this because no one brings it up. But Jade was about to die because Grandpa left her outside on a hill alone with literally two guns, two flintlock pistols. This is where the famous line, "This is why we shouldn't give babies dual-wielding flintlock pistols" from Homestuck comes from. So yeah, this was, he mind-controlled Beck because he knew Beck was a first guardian, and he knew Beck could take away the guns. That was his first instinct. His second instinct comes from, oh my god, someone is on Jade's island, and they're trying to kill her after seeing Grandpa. That's obviously not the case. It is culturally what Tavros thinks because their culture doesn't have adults of the same species. So Tavros saw this guy and thought, oh my god, someone's trying to rob Jade, so I'm going to use this firing gun to kill him. So his intentions were pretty good. Now, you could say he was a little overzealous, a little too malicious towards this intruder, something castle doctrine or whatever. And you could say, well, it was not up to you to, save Jade's life, and you probably should have stayed out of it. But his intentions were good. I don't think you can argue that. Wanting to save someone's life from a gun and an intruder is not bad. Let's say that, you were in your house, there was an intruder in there, and he was going to kill you, straight up. And a man saved you. You would think, oh my god, thank god that man was there to save me. And I think that Jade is in somewhat of a similar situation, not because of the intruder part, but because of the, playing with two flintlock pistols thing, which is very, very dangerous. That's not good. Do not have children have flintlock pistols. That is my endorsement. I think that's pretty safe to give you that advice without a legal disclaimer. Do not give babies guns. All right. So that Tavros's intentions were not bad. Now, a lot of people seem to want to twist this into Tavros wanting to hit on Jade, and so he's being a nice guy. And you know what? I can see that. I can see Tavros being a nice guy. He kind of is a nice guy in a lot of ways. He reminds me of Jerry from Rick and Morty. But Jerry's not in jail, right? He hasn't done any crime. In fact, he is very law-abiding, almost to a fault. Tavros, in the same vein, is a good guy. He is a nice guy outside of being a nice guy, if that sentence makes any fucking sense. But, yeah, it's not a crime to be kind of a cringy boy, right? Now, it is very funny to dunk on Tavros for being a cringy boy. I think that's fair. I think that's fine, but that's not like it's not like a criminal thing, right? He's not evil for that. I think that even in Homestuck, he's outclassed by other cringy boys like Aridin or I forgot his name. Equius. What the fuck? He really is a Void player, huh? But anyway, Tavros' intentions were good. I think we can all agree on this. They might have been a little weird because he wanted to hit on Jade, and that is true. He does hit on Jade after this. But that's funny. Come on, it's funny. It's funny to watch a boy strike out. That's funny. Like, Homestuck's humor is very dark. Grandpa dying is something that happened so far in the past that it was at the point that it was like time manipulation stuff, but I don't know. I think that moment is very funny. So let's move on to Tavros' sort of presence in the world, because he might not be evil in intentions, but you know what they say: the road to the paved road to the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I had to Google that. I'm sorry. Anyway, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So maybe Tavros fucked up in some way and did this horrible thing. Well, yeah, he did kind of do that fucked up thing, because he explicitly says in the exchange with Jade, you weren't around to ask permission for this because you were a baby. I really wish you were, but I just kind of acted, of my own accord and killed this man. And I think that does show a kind of a degree of danger from Tavros that is present in many of the other trolls. That because they don't understand human culture, and they really only understand murder and killing. Even someone as sort of soft-hearted as Tavros only understands killing. And, it is through the monitor, and it is through the proxy of this dog, and it is through the proxy of a gun, but he does kill someone. That's fucked up. And frankly, he doesn't really show remorse so much for it as oh God, he doesn't say, oh God, I took a life. He says, oh God, I might have insulted Jade, this person. But at the same time, that danger isn't present any other time during the comic. This is a one-off flub, right? And it's pretty safe to say that he's not going to make this mistake again, because he doesn't, and he seems to now understand after this conversation that parents exist. Because he says, what's a grandpa? Jade explains it. He's like, oh God, I shouldn't have done that. So yeah, he is dangerous, but he's also no more dangerous than any other troll. So if we're going to have that conversation about how the trolls' culture have primed them for being sort of dangerous individuals, then I think it's better to have that discussion, not about Tavros specifically, but about the trolls as a whole, right? Because if you're going to say, well, the trolls are primed to be dangerous individuals, not only is Tavros kind of a weak example of that, there are other people in the comic that you could make that point about. So that point is kind of strange being directed at Tavros, especially given that most people who were bringing this stuff up were Vriska likers, of which I am one, but I'm not. I like to think that I'm not fucking crazy. So there we go. Tavros is not evil. Tavros is not a bad person. Tavros made a mistake. And he made a mistake in a context that was, I think, kind of understandable to make, right? But I want to ask a more interesting question, right? I want to ask, why was this a controversy in the first place? And why does it still kind of feel weird? Because I've explained this in pretty logical detail, I think. I think that if not convincing you personally, if you disagree, then you can at least understand this point of view that I'm trying to espouse, right? I've made my argument coherent. But the problem is, why does it still feel a little weird, right? Because I've pointed out a couple things, a couple little contradictions that might have made you kind of scratch your head and say, "Oh God, what is up with that?" The main one being, Tavros does a lot of stuff that is kind of fucked up, but he is contrasted with these characters who do other fucked up things that we kind of don't register, right? What I'm saying is, when we see him kill Grandpa, that's alarming to us. That is upsetting, almost. But when we see Vriska killing someone, we kind of forgive her, because she feels bad in a different way, I think. Essentially, in life, we kind of take cues from others more than we think, right? When we are trying to hold someone accountable, a lot of what we interpret of their accountability is also what they will admit to being accountable for. What I'm saying more is, in the example of Vriska and Tavros, Vriska does not often show remorse for her actions, right? And if she does, she kind of says, well, I was pushed into this, and that's why I'm sad about this thing, right? When she talks to John in that pretty big conversation they have, she talks about being regretful of all the people she's killed, but she couches it in terms of like, I'm sad that I had to grow up in this society, which is very different from actually being sorry about killing people. Now, I'm not saying these feelings are invalid on her part. I'm not saying that that's a bad analysis of this situation. But if you contrast that to Tavros, who is a more kind of apologetic person and a more sorry person, we kind of take more cues from his behavior about how sorry he should be about something. Because he is being pretty hard on himself at some of these points. He blames himself for a lot of the things that happen to him, and we as viewers kind of take his word for it because of how human beings kind of assess that kind of thing. And this is going to be a weird left turn here, so bear with me, please. But let's compare... I can't believe I'm fucking saying this in an essay about Tavros Homestuck, but let's compare accusations of adultery and, sexual abuse by Bill Clinton versus Donald Trump. Now you might understand the content warning at the beginning of this video, but I'm serious. So Bill Clinton, if you guys don't remember, if you weren't alive or you just don't know American politics, he had sex with one of his secretaries or whatever staffer, and he essentially denied it until he very publicly came out and didn't deny it anymore. And he was very austere, and he took these things very seriously, and he kind of addressed them head on, either to outright deny them head on or to eventually accept them. And as a result, he was impeached. He was legitimately kicked out of office. He was no longer the president after this. And that's pretty interesting. Now, you compare this to someone like Donald Trump, who in the run-up to the 2016 election got all these accusations of just the most absolutely garbage locker room talk you could ever think of. You've heard it, you've seen it. And of course, this was about 20 years after the Bill Clinton thing. He addressed it in a completely different way. He didn't comment on it at all. He just kind of let it slide. He didn't have anything to say about it. If he did, he would blow it off. He would say it's just locker room talk. And essentially, all the same people who would have gotten so up Bill Clinton's ass about the same thing, and Bill Clinton, by the way, did probably, all his stuff was consensual, it seems. I don't know all the facts here, but you compare this outrage to this guy who just basically blows it off and doesn't care. And this is a man who has done a great many more, one would imagine, sex acts than Bill Clinton did. Again, I don't know. I'm just talking about the shit they were accused of. This isn't like a formal rap sheet or anything for either of these guys. But the reaction is very different, and you can see this reflected in Tavros and Vriska as well, because Vriska is someone who if she doesn't apologize, she blows off her responsibility onto her society, which isn't wrong, to be fair. But then you see Tavros, who is more apologetic and immediately sort of submissive about his own role in these things. And it makes you think, like, okay, this guy who's done less is getting more shit from the fandom for doing less murders, comparatively. Why is that? I think that's very interesting to discuss, because I think the reason is just how they treat themselves, right? You essentially have this situation where Vriska doesn't care that she's killed a lot of people. She sees it as necessary for her own survival, whereas Tavros, he has a more like, oh God, what have I done mentalities, leading him to be unable to kill people. And when he does, it's more alarming. It's less expected. And it's interesting to track that in Homestuck fandom cases, because it is totally divorced from anything he actually did. It's totally divorced from any tactile events in his life. It is totally a product of how he is viewed and how he treats himself and how the narration treats him, right? So in summary, no, Tavros didn't do anything wrong. You're not, like, wrong to think he's a weird guy, because he is a weird guy, but, you know, that's fine. You can have a weird guy. He's kind of funny. I think it was kind of hilarious that he did kill Grandpa. I think that was, like, played as a joke in the comic, and it was kind of like one of those dark humor moments that kind of prevailed the early acts and stuff. But yeah, I think that it's fine that he killed Grandpa early. That's my decision. That's my final ruling, and then I bang the gavel again. But yeah, again, sorry that took such a weird fucking left turn in there. But I don't know. I just see this a lot where people who are sorry for the shit they did get more shit than people who are not. And that kind of pisses me off. And I don't know why that happens psychologically, but it's something that I've noticed, especially in terms of creatives in media who are doing, you know, nice things. Rebecca Sugar springs to mind of this. Or there was a controversy a while ago for the She-Ra community. And all of these things are valid as critiques, right? I'm not saying that they're not. I'm just saying that a lot of attention seems to get drawn on them, and more attention should be put on, like, you know, what did they do in the context of who they were? Is this really so bad? Is this really so criminal, et cetera, et cetera? Think about things more critically when there are accusations flying around. But that's kind of a stretch to include about this this fictional man. Anyway, if you guys tell me how you feel about these podcast-style episodes in the comments, I'd really like the feedback. I like talking as an orator instead of reading scripts, and I do have pretty bad dyslexia, so it takes me a really long time to make these scripts. I'd love to go into detail about my process sometime, having dyslexia, like not wanting to write down as much as I can. But for now, I'm going to end it here. I really appreciate it. Like I said, give me a comment if you like this style, and I might make more. See you later. Hello. This is Funk McLovin. This is another lecture-style video/audio file. This time about absurdism in Homestuck. Now, absurdism is kind of a popular philosophy, especially lately, with the popularity of shows like Rick and Morty and things of that nature. It's just something that has cropped up recently. Also, Albert Camus, who is the father of absurdism, is often assigned in high school. I think a lot of us remember reading The Stranger or other of his works. I think The Stranger is kind of a bad place to start with Camus, even though it is a very straightforward narrative. But if you're not familiar with absurdism, I'll give you a little rundown before I get into the video here. But basically, my thesis is Homestuck has a lot of themes of absurdism, and in fact is an absurd narrative, because Homestuck rejects a sort of normal philosophy of transcendent meaning, and it kind of embraces this rejection of existentialism as well as pre-existentialist thought and comes into something new and whimsical and sort of more based in absurdism. So like I said, absurdism was developed by Albert Camus as a response to existentialism. A lot of people would call absurdism a type of existentialism. I don't really like this because I'm not a big fan of Nietzsche. And Albert Camus just has a lot more insight in a passionate sense than Nietzsche, who I consider to be kind of a big downer. That's an oversimplification, but this is a fucking video about Homestuck, so cut me some slack. The main work that I'm going to be quoting for this piece is The Myth of Sisyphus, which is something, like I said, a lot of people probably haven't read unless they're into philosophy already. The Myth of Sisyphus is an essay by Albert Camus, and the English translation of it from French is very dense, so I'm going to be quoting as best I can. I would suggest reading it, and I would suggest kind of rereading it, because it is, like I said, a very dense work. His prose is very, like, or not his prose, his writing style is incredibly, like, the man is a fucking genius, is what I'll say. And he's a little bit too smart for his own damn good, because sometimes I have to read his stuff over and over and over to just, like, kind of come to terms with what the fuck he means by it. Let's take this quote, for example. Man, and he's using man in the general sense here, in terms of, like, this is humanity, sentient beings. Man stands face to face with the irrational. He feels within him his longing for happiness and for reason. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. And by the world, he means the universe at large. What does he mean by this? In a simpler way, it means that we are all born with a sort of curiosity and a determination, a will to power, as Nietzsche would call it. But we are kind of disappointed by the universe, and the answers to the questions that we ask, that we imbue with this transcendent meaning, are often very disappointing. For instance, we might say, what is the meaning of life? And the answer is kind of disappointing, depending on how you approach it. An evolutionary biologist might say, well, the meaning of life is to procreate. A Christian might say, the meaning of life is to serve God. And to me, at least, these are kind of disappointing on their face. They don't really, really make sense to me. They just kind of seem like excuses. And what he's driving at here is that there is no meaning of life. It's all bullshit, and we're all going to die someday. But he has an answer to this existential quandary. And he takes this answer in the form of The Myth of Sisyphus, as the work is titled. Now, The Myth of Sisyphus calls back to a Greek myth. And I'm not going to go over the whole myth for brevity's sake, but that myth ends with a man named Sisyphus. He's a very arrogant king, Sisyphus. He's being punished by rolling a boulder up a hill forever. And this is supposed to read to us as torturous. And indeed it does. However, Albert Camus has this to say. The struggle itself towards the height is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Now, Albert Camus, he draws in this very potent metaphor, right? This metaphor of a guy rolling a boulder up a hill, and he says, we must imagine this man happy. Because that is the absurd. The absurd is that we are Sisyphus. We are as Sisyphus. And we are tasked with the agonizing, torturous realization that we are born to push boulders up hills. Fuck. Oh, no, not that. It's very depressing. It's very, very stultifying. But Camus has this kind of turn at the end. He says, one must imagine him happy. Well, how can we imagine this man happy if he's being tortured? Well, that is the absurd. That is the absurdism. You must embrace your boulder. And you may do this by any means, but, that's what we're going to get into, hopefully. So, the absurd, to recap. The world can be not only very cruel, but very uncaring. I wrote that down in my notes because I like that quote. I think the worst thing to realize about the world is it doesn't give a fuck about you, right? It can just go on without you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care. And that's very damaging to the ego, right? In a very visceral sense, psychologically. But we can overcome this by sort of accepting that, yes, the world can go on without us, but there is also something that cannot go on without us, and that is us, right? I don't think Albert Camus ever says that outright. That might be an invention of my brain. I might have heard it somewhere. I don't know. But we cannot go on without ourselves. And we are here for a while, so we might as well fucking do something with it. So now I'm going to tie this all back to Homestuck, because that's why you clicked on this thing. So there it is. I have 5 case studies with 5 different characters and their sort of status as absurd heroes. Now, case study 1 is everyone's favorite character, Vriska. Now, Vriska is specifically when I'm talking about Vriska, I'm talking about parenthesis Vriska, the one who becomes a punk, not the one who is revived in the retcon. But Vriska struggles against the world at every turn. She struggles against the world when she's alive on Alternia, and she struggles with the world after she dies and goes into the dream bubbles. She struggles even though she doesn't really have to. She's dead now. But she does. And she becomes very engrossed by it. It becomes her boulder that she's rolling up this hill, right? And she achieves a great deal. She finds the house juju. But she also suffers. She suffers great rejection by John. She suffers great rejection by her peers, by Arania abandoning her and Mina. And she suffers a great deal by pursuing Mina as well. There's a quote from the myth of Sisyphus. Man is always prey to his truths. Once he has admitted them, he cannot free himself from them. Vriska is stuck with her truth. And her truth, much like Sisyphus's boulder, gives her a great deal of meaning. She wants to be a hero, right? She wants to be a hero when she goes to fight Bec Noir. She wants to be a hero when she finds the house juju. And she wants to be a hero throughout the whole narrative, even after she is literally dead and in the ground. But she overcomes this. She overcomes her own truth. This gives her a great deal of pleasure, giving up this truth. She embraces Mina. After she is rejected by Mina, obviously she goes back and reunites with Terezi, the Terezi that died in the retcon. So in this way, in her quixotic nature, why did I say quixotic? What is that? That's not a word, is it? It's quixotic, right? Either way, doesn't matter. She gives up her truth of heroism and pursues something else, and this is greatly to her benefit. This is her journey, her arc. Nothing is wasted. She is able to be a complete person, basically, by following her whims, by doing things that are not easy but very difficult, by accepting herself. And the last scene we see of her is her embracing Terezi and being very happy. And I think that's kind of nice. It's random. It's totally fucking random. Like, the outcomes of her efforts are incredibly random and absurd and fucked up and weird. And she gets insanely sad, but she ends up through it a happy person. By chance, certainly, but by chance as well as her own positive attitude. And that's kind of a confusing thing to say, right? It's not very, like I said, it's not good for the ego, but it's good for you, the person, the consciousness. It's like accepting that the world might be fucked up is not easy. Or accepting the world does not revolve around us is not easy. And accepting our struggles might be for nothing is not easy either. The boulder's always going to roll down the hill. But that's how it is. The second case study I have is a little more clear-cut. I wanted to start with Vriska because she's a popular character. That's it. And I like her. I know the most about her. The second case study is Dave. Let's hear another quote from the myth of Sisyphus here, from Albert Camus. A man wants to earn money in order to be happy, and his whole effort and the best of a life are devoted to the earning of that money. Happiness is forgotten. The means are taken for an end. Now, this is, again, some dense wordage, but let's explain it like this. Have you ever been at your job and thought, this is fucking miserable, I hate this, but I gotta be here to make money? And you're kind of missing something there when you think like that. You're missing the fact that, like, okay, you want to make money to make yourself happy later, but right now you are goddamn miserable, my friend. And that's not a good way to be. And, maybe you shouldn't have a job that makes you fucking miserable. Because a lot of people I know, I have a job, for instance. I have a day job. I work at a farm market, a front desk. And I really like that job, genuinely. I like customer service. I like talking to people. I like, being a manager, stuff like that. And a while ago, some of my coworkers left for a different job, which was in insurance. And I had an opportunity myself to do this because I have a bachelor's degree and that was the only requirement. And they said, hey, you should apply. It's more money. And I thought, yeah, it would be more money, but it would crush my fucking soul because I've complained about the insurance company ad nauseum and I'm not trying to, do that. And that's kind of counterintuitive, but I think it's kind of wraps up what this quote means. The means are taken for an end. The job is taken as your life, basically. You know what I mean? If you've ever had a shitty job. If you've never had a shitty job and you're listening to this, well, congratulations, but most of us have to have shitty jobs. And they're a little shitty. Even my job is a little shitty, but I mostly like it. But how does this pertain to Dave? How does this, talk about jobs pertain to our buddy, the Time Wizard? Well, Dave, of his own volition, he gives up his powers. He sees that they're making him miserable, and so he simply says, I'm not going to use them anymore. I'm not going to, mistake the means for the end. I'm not going to be the time guy just because I'm the time guy. I'm going to stop doing this. And indeed, for the rest of the comic, the only times he uses them are when he is compelled to by Jade. He refuses to do so. Sorry, my cats are fighting. I don't know if you can hear that. Dave is a very wise character. That's kind of an underrated facet of Dave. He's not very good interpersonally. He kind of reads to me as like kind of he's got Asperger's or something. He can't relate to people, but he's very wise. Asperger's in like the actual sense. I'm not trying to be derogatory here. I think there's a case to be made that he actually has Asperger's. More on that later, maybe in a different video. But yeah, he sees what brings him happiness, and he's very easily able to be like, yeah, I don't want to do what makes me miserable anymore. That just doesn't sound fun, right? And the myth of Sisyphus kind of, in my mind, kind of breaks down here because Sisyphus cannot abandon what makes him miserable, but we're going to ignore that for the sake of the metaphor. That brings us to case study number 3, Dave's friend Rose. Dave's sister Rose. Here's another quote that will lead us into Rose's discussion. Without culture, and the relative freedom it implies, society, even when perfect, is but a jungle. This is why any authentic creation is a gift to the future. Wow, I like that one. That one's simple. That one's easy to understand. Let's take it in 2 parts. Without culture and the relative freedom it implies, society, even when perfect, is but a jungle. We've all felt this, right? We've all seen Mean Girls, where she compares, a civilized society to a jungle. We've all felt that. We've all felt the connection to our animal predecessors, even in sort of quote-unquote civilized society. If you've ever seen a bar fight, my friends, you have seen the ape in man, right? If you've ever, seen 2 people argue, if you've ever been, witness to a stupid fucking argument, especially between men, then you have seen the animal nature of humanity. And that is something we cannot be free of. Now let's take the second part of the quote. This is why any authentic creation is a gift to the future. Wow. That's nice. Again, Camus has this thing where he says something incredibly fucking depressing. That we're all fucking apes and animals and we can't control it, no matter how much trappings we have. But then he turns it around and says, but isn't it cool that we kind of do have these trappings that we can provide for our future like this? That's wonderful. I really like that. It, I don't know, it gives me a sense of purpose, even in an absurd world. Now, Rose, this pertains to her because she is a seer. She sees the future. Now, this kind of goes for Rose in Act 6, when she kind of has her shit together a little more until she gets drunk. She undertakes a great many forward-thinking goals, like her FAQ, for instance, and her little guide that she's writing on the meteor. She is very devoted to the future and sees that the universe will not provide by default, right? If the universe is cruel, we must undertake to make it less cruel, even some small amount. And she must provide actively, and she takes joy in this. That's very critical. Rose embraces this boulder. She says, I do not mind that this is difficult, and I actually enjoy pushing this rock uphill, even though some of my efforts will be inevitably wasted. I don't know, that's pretty clear cut to me. I really like Rose. She's very straightforward with her motivations, usually. Now let's bring to case study 4. This is one of my favorite ones. I saved it for the end, or near the end. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm yawning. Goodness gracious. I'm recording this at 1 a.m. Here's a quote for Roxy. The human heart has a tiresome tendency to label as fate only what crushes it. But happiness likewise, in its way, is without reason, since it is inevitable. Think about that one. Again, this is something incredibly depressing with something wonderful brought out of it. Let's take this in 2 parts again. The human heart has a tiresome tendency to label fate as only what crushes it. How can we can relate to that, right? Anyone has, had a moment in their life where they're like, this fucking sucks. Why is my fate to be here? Right? We have this sense of fate. But we only invoke fate when we're talking about something bad, right? We only talk about inevitability when we're talking about something unfortunate, like, oh, I have cancer. Why must this happen to me? But we never think about that when we're happy, right? We never think about fate when we are pleased. We never think about luck. And you could relate to this to Vriska with all her talk of fate too, but I want to relate it to Roxy. Because Roxy is a fascinating character to me. She is probably the most miserable character in all of Homestuck. She is drunk. She is alone. She is without companion. She is left out of the love triangle that consumes the rest of her friends, and everyone around her kind of betrays her in some way. But she is the most absurd character in all of Homestuck, because every single nugget of happiness she can draw out of the world, she squeezes it from like blood from a boulder, right? She never takes for granted her friends. She betters herself constantly, and she takes difficult avenues to do so. This is very critically absurd. She sees that the life is meaningless. She sees that nothing is real. As a Void player, she's, directly in contact with this, and yet she says, no, I'm going to be happy instead. I'm going to be upbeat, I'm going to be cheerful, and I'm going to be a beacon of light to my fucking friends. And she is. She is a luminous beacon among her depressed and horrible friends, and she's probably the most outwardly cheerful in all of the cast, right? Except maybe like Nepeta, who we love. We love Nepeta. Roxy accepts happiness instead of wallowing in fear, and I really admire her for that. She draws herself out of being drunk on her own, which I don't think is very realistic, but is very admirable. She's a role model in all of Homestuck. I really love Roxy. I don't think it can be understated. And I don't think it's a coincidence that she is a Void player. Void is an aspect associated with nothingness and meaninglessness, and yet she is very cheerful and happy. The other Void players, who are Equius and his ancestor, are just kind of these oblivious motherfuckers. And by contrast, Roxy draws a lot of meaning from nothingness, which is her power, literally. It's pretty cool. I don't think I need to explain more here. Roxy's awesome. I've talked about this before. Roxy fucking cool. I don't know. I don't have anything more to say. I wish I did. I wish this was more complicated so I could talk about it more, but I think you get what I'm saying. That brings us to the final case study, which is Caliborn. Now, I talked about Caliborn in the last video about Homestuck and Gnosticism. And I think a lot of actually what I said there pertains to this. Let's start with the quote from Camus. What can meaning outside my condition mean to me? I can understand only in human terms. What I touch, what resists me, that is what I understand. Let's break this down. Camus asks, what can a meaning outside my condition mean to me? Now, outwardly, this kind of seems hedonistic. Like, anything outside of me is meaningless. Like, I'm the center of the world, whatever. I don't think that's what he means, because he goes on to say, I can understand only in human terms. I can understand only in human terms. He's not saying I am the only thing that is real. I'm the only thing that matters. He is saying I am the only thing I can understand. I must filter my experiences through myself, my senses, my five senses. He uses touch for his example, but he says, what I touch, what resists me, that is what I understand. He is saying I have a very limited outlook, and I must act upon it, because that is my nature. He accepts human nature, and I like that. Now, Caliborn is not a human, but he also does this. He also accepts his nature. His goals, Caliborn's goals, to be fucking Lord English, they're very tactile, they're very direct, and they're very whimsical. And by whimsical, I do not mean like lighthearted. I mean based on Caliborn's whims. He does what he wants because he wants to. That's as simple as. Right? In absurdism, there's this big thing about doing things for their own sake. Not in a hedonistic way, again, but in a sort of absurd way. Like, we must do something because it is... now I'm burping. I'm yawning, now I'm burping. We must do things not because they are easy, not because they are hedonistic, but because they are what we want to do. We must commit to what we want to do. And by God, Caliborn commits to what he wants to do. He accepts his condition, even though it's rather shit. He lives in a fucking cave on the moon. He's shackled to his garbage sister who he hates. And even though he's an evil guy, he accomplishes greatness. He does. That's undeniable. He is a slave to his whims. And, again, this is somewhat depressing. We are a slave to our boulder. We are a slave to our whims. But he wants and he takes. And by taking directly and asking the universe for what he wants, he gets it. We must, like Caliborn, accept our wants and take them, even if they may seem repulsive. And that's a very hard lesson to learn, but it's incredibly vital. A lot of guilt is instilled into us by society and by sort of philosophy at large, by psychology, by all these other, metrics. I don't like that, right? It's not good to be ashamed. You have to want, you have to take, and you are only able to filter your experiences through yourself. That doesn't mean, obviously, just become an unfiltered mess of a person or never be ashamed of yourself. But it means, maybe move yourself into a position where you can be who you want to be. Maybe that's within your control. Accept responsibility for your own happiness, essentially. And again, that's not easy. It's easier said than done. It's not easy. It's easier to just go along with society and sort of take the prescribed notions with you. I'm struggling with that myself. I struggle a lot with that, but I'm getting better at it. You must carve out a niche for yourself. You must live unapologetically. Because guess what? We don't know what the fuck comes after this. So it's imperative that while you have something this life, you make it good, right? And if you don't, the boulder's going to crush you, buddy. It's going to roll right over you. That's no good either. And it's not going to be easy. But if you don't do it, if you don't take responsibility for your happiness, if you don't start taking estrogen, if you don't, get off the booze, if you don't do that, you're going to be fucking miserable. You know what makes you miserable. You don't need me to tell you that. Unless you are, suffering from some kind of severe delusion, you know what's making you miserable, and you know how to fix it, probably. You just have to take the steps, and you got to fucking kick yourself in the ass to do it. And, it's not going to be easy. You might have to hit rock bottom. I don't know. But Caliborn tells us that this pays off. It's good. To conclude this out, before I hit the half an hour mark, because I don't want to make this too long, Homestuck is an absurd work. Its characters are absurd, as I've said before, from Vriska to Dave to Rose to Roxy to Caliborn. They're all absurd in different ways. But the narration is also very absurd, both in the philosophical sense as we've discussed, but also in the just generally, general definitional sense, right? It's absurd, it's crazy, it's wacky. It often the narrative diverges whimsically, and it actively alienates the reader. It is not just of absurd heroes, but absurd content, right? Hussey wants to examine this world in a very whimsical way, and that allows the reader to fill in the blanks, which is to Homestuck's credit. I think it's one of the better aspects of the work itself, but it's absurd, it's crazy, it's wacky, it's goofy, and I love it. And, for all its faults, for all its many, many, many faults, it's still pretty good, and it still offers a great deal of insights into life, I think. Especially when viewed from a lens like some kind of philosophy, right? Now, I'm going to wrap this up, but this is going up on Patreon first. If you want to see this stuff early, it's on Patreon. Subscribe to me there, just to support me, because I appreciate it. And thank you for listening. I know I can ramble. I hope I was articulate. And everyone have a great day. I really, really do want you to have a great day. If you don't have a great day, well, let's just say I'm going to be pissed off. All right, everybody. See you later.
Hello, everybody. This is going to be different to my usual presentations, but thank you for coming. It's late as fuck, and I'm high as a kite, and I want to talk about Homestuck's title, because I had some notes written on it. So Homestuck has always fascinated me as a title, because it seems to me to be not very apt, right? It's a story about making a new universe. It's a story about friendship and coming of age. So what the fuck does that have to do with the two words Homestuck? And I want to get into that. So this might be a little boring, but let's take a look at the actual title, Homestuck. Let's break it down. First and foremost, Homestuck is a pastiche on Earthbound, which was the style of the time. People have been aping Earthbound since fucking time immemorial. In case of point, Homestuck. Obviously, Earth is home, bound is stuck, which is, I don't know. There's not really much to say except for that feature exists. The literal meaning of Homestuck is stuck at home, or at least that's how I interpret it. Home being a real geographic location that you live at. It is occupied space. Home is usually a circumstantial place. In other words, it is somewhere that you end up, not somewhere that you pick. At least in Homestuck. And then stuck is unable to leave a physical location, bound, if you will, somehow. Tied to it in not just a geographical way, but an emotional way as well. Think of the original character who is Homestuck. John is Homestuck. He is stuck in his home because his dad won't let him leave, but also because he presumably has emotional attachments to that area. Homestuck is a state of being. Homestuck as in the verb when you're being homestuck. It is a state of being during adolescence, especially. It's defined by a lack of freedom and immaturity, and it is a state where needs are being met. In other words, John has enough to eat, and Rose, she has a roof over her head, but something else is yearned for. Think of the I Want song in Disney, like Ariel or Belle. They're saying, okay, I can eat and I have a roof over my head, but I want more. There's something else out there for me. John and Jane are the quintessential examples, as are really all the kids. And kids, I just mean the children in the story. The trolls are included in that. Everyone is stuck in their home. Everyone gets a little message displaying their home in the beginning. Now, the characters very quickly leave their homes, which is why I call this sort of a misnomer. Because originally I thought Homestuck was just kind of the title that Andrew Hussey gave the work when it was originally just another MSPA or a MS Paint adventure. But I kind of have rethought that. Like, I thought that it was a remnant of Homestuck's early days, but I no longer believe that because I think I've read more into the work. Caliborn and Calliope, the twins, are arguably the most stuck at home of any of the characters. They're an extreme version of what I was talking about before, where their needs are being met. In other words, they're getting plenty of meat and candy, but they want something more, especially Caliborn, who is, goes out into the world and fucks everything up. By longing, the longing these characters results. Sorry, I'm fucking up my words. I'm high as shit. The longing by these characters results in destroying their world to make way for a new one. This is a metaphor for coming of age. Like, if you're my age, or, younger, maybe you're going to college, then you remember how it is, like, going out on your own for the first time. Maybe you didn't even leave, like, your home yet, but you're out in the world. You're kind of contending with somewhere that doesn't really feel like your home for the first time. And you're putting down roots somewhere. You're gaining a new familiarity. And it's not entirely, like, fun, but it's useful, and it feels like that freedom that you've yearned for. Now, if you still live with your parents, I don't really know what to tell you, but what also happens in Homestuck is that people keep evolving into new homes to be stuck in. For instance, the meteor and the ship during the time skip, not the time skip, but the yellow yard and the meteor trip to the green sun. You know what I'm talking about. After Act 5. This is a new mode of being Homestuck as compared to their old homes. They're independent. They don't have any guardians hanging around, but they're still aimless. They're still restless. They still yearn for more. My cat's yowling. This is a lacking stasis, if you will. It is a state of being defined by an unmet need. It is yearning for freedom. It is wanting something more, and it pervades Homestuck in the kind of the background of the comic. John especially is a good example of being Homestuck and this yearning for something more. He wants to not just escape his geographic location, but escape the coddling of his father. He feels very coddled by his dad. He feels stifled. Rose feels very stifled by her mother. Dave, I think, feels, in danger from his brother. And Jade, of course, feels estranged from everyone she knows. These states of being are endemic, or have as endemic, or maybe I'm just using endemic because I want to sound fucking smart, but they engender this sense of like, well, okay, what's next? What more could I have? Is this really all there is? And we've all felt that, Some call it senioritis. Now, again, these kids are like 13. I think they're a little young to be having that yearning. I don't know. You kind of start being rebellious when you're like that age. So maybe that's when the feelings start. But that's one of the reasons I think that one of Homestuck's missteps is making them so young, is because these feelings are usually felt by people who actually have started to gain independence in a real way that a 13-year-old I don't think would have. But that's a small point. The age is kind of arbitrary. It doesn't really come up much. Ultimately, the heroes earn their freedom and their peace on Earthsea. Now, the question is, I've talked before about how one Homestuck can lead to another. For instance, Dave can go from his house to the meteor where he still feels stifled. Is Earthsea still Homestuck? Have they just become stuck at home in a new way, in a way that they can finally settle upon? Or is this truly an evolution past being Homestuck? Also, obviously, the beta kids, John, Dave, Rose, and Jade, they are literally stuck in the house juju, so that's another literal example of Homestuck. But back to the question, is Earthsea a true new land? And I think there's two different answers depending on which ending of Homestuck you subscribe to. Is being Homestuck an escapable state at all? In the epilogues, certainly not. The kids are fucking as miserable as they ever were on Earthsea. I would argue they're more miserable on Earthsea than they ever were in their houses. Like, I think that just the epilogues depict a profoundly sad group of people with very few exceptions. I would say no exceptions, actually. Candy Roxy is probably one of the only characters who's like doing decently. And that's a very charitable interpretation. I'm not fully caught up with the epilogues and Homestuck 2 yet, but epilogues say no, this is a permanent state of being. You are Homestuck forever. And I find that very bleak and not very actionable. It certainly adds a lot of drama, like to the story, but I don't value that necessarily. I think the more cathartic and more useful answer is the answer that comes in the Snapchat epilogues, which are the kind of original post-canon, because it was released in October of, I want to say, 2016, after the comic had ended. And it was a bunch of Snapchats that featured all the characters, knocking around Earthsea. They had little Snapchat filters, and they integrated some modern technology. They're now viewable, I believe, as the last page of Homestuck proper, but these epilogues depict a very different picture than we see in the epilogues. Sorry, the Snapchat epilogues depict a very different picture than the book epilogues. And this is primarily due to the Snapchat epilogues are more, shall we say, slice of life. They're more down to earth, as it were, down to Earthsea. They're more based in established relationships and sort of tying up loose ends. The characters, they don't necessarily look happy, but they look peaceful. They look like they've been able to calm down and been able to forge a new life. And they're doing adult things, critically. They're kind of dressing up. Jane has a business. They're going to dinner. They're doing adult things. They have graduated into adulthood in a very meaningful way. Now, I like the Snapchat epilogues. I'm not going to get into whether the epilogues or the Snapchat epilogues are like canon, which one I like more. That's just the symbolism that I found in the name Homestuck. I still think Homestuck as a name is kind of vague, and I think that there could be other names that would drive the themes of Homestuck home more. I couldn't think of one. I know someone came up with the name Sky and Symphony as the story of Homestuck, and I like that. It's got a sort of alliteration to it, and I don't know, it seems more thematic to me. I thought off the top of my dome, Undertale, that's a good name. And I'm just kidding. If you're thinking of a name, I would involve something with universes or coming of age or just anything like that, because Homestuck kind of undercuts the later themes of the work, which are more to do with the self than a geographic or emotional location. I think you could probably do a deeper analysis than I've done into the idea of the Homestuck as verb. But, is called what it's called. Sorry, my microphone fucked up. Homestuck is called what it's called, and I can't change that. And, I think it's a good title for what it is. And I hope that my discussion of it has deepened your understanding in some small way. If you're on Patreon, thank you for subscribing. And if you're on YouTube, thank you for subscribing to YouTube. Sorry I was coughing all the way through this fucking thing. I just smoked a bunch of weed, and I have a little hypothesis that I am not as articulate on drugs as I am off drugs, which is fucking groundbreaking, I know, but I think I am more honest and I'm less in my head, so I'm able to kind of bang something like this out in a little easier fashion. So tell me what you think about me getting high and rambling, and I will maybe post more in the future. Thank you. Fuck, how do I... Okay. Hello, I'm Funk McLovin. This is a Patreon video that I plan to release to YouTube at some point. So if you're listening on Patreon, thank you for subscribing. And if you're listening on YouTube, thank you for subscribing on YouTube. I wanted to discuss Homestuck and Masculinity, which is something I think as a theme has been examined weirdly. It's been examined in terms of like Dave Strider more than I think the two characters who really it matters to most, which is what I'm going to be talking about. So you've seen the title of this piece, which is Homestuck and Masculinity, dads, or whatever the fuck I decided to call it. And I wanted to explore that a little bit through what Homestuck refers to as man grit. Now, man grit is something that we see a lot in Homestuck's early acts and kind of drops off after a while. But man grit is something, it's sort of Homestuck's manliness, which is related to actual powers that people seem to have. Jane and John's fathers seem to have a lot of man grit, and they are able to do supernatural feats of strength like moving safes and refrigerators and breaking out of jails, etc. Goodness me. Sorry, I've got some notes here. You might hear some shuffling of pages. Homestuck is not overly concerned with gender. It is a work with many references to it, but gender is sort of an arbitrary construct. Many stories are like this, where the gender of the characters don't matter. Famously, the film Alien was cast without genders in mind for the main characters, and Ripley, the main character, could have been either a man or a woman, and it ended up being Sigourney Weaver, which is kind of fun. So gender does not matter to every single story. It's sometimes an arbitrary thing. Gender is occasionally, in Homestuck, a matter of symmetry. For instance, there are 2 and 2 male to female kids, and the trolls are also, there's 6 females and 7 male trolls. This is sort of just a creative flourish. Hussey really likes symmetry in his works, and I think that's just kind of an expression of that. A character who does deal directly with gender is John. Not due to his transness, or her transness, I suppose, with June, actually, but with his interactions with Dad. We're actually not going to be talking about June too much in this video, unfortunately. Dad is trying to make John a man through his notes that he finds around the place. Let me find one of the notes and read it. So this is a note from, it's page 3396 of Homestuck. That's pretty late, I think. I don't know what act that's from, but it says, "Son, if you're reading this, it means you have inherited my wallet. You have truly become an adult man. Wield it with responsibility and integrity. I am so proud of you." So that is Dad's words to John, and we can see that Dad is trying to instill a very traditional masculinity into John, which is not necessarily a bad thing. In this case, I would say it's a very good thing. John's father seems to be a good role model, a good father. He provides for his son. John kind of doesn't like it sometimes. He thinks his dad is annoying, but that's normal, I think. So he's trying to instill in John man grit, and critically, John doesn't really pick up on this. When he inherits the wallet, it's a sad moment because Dad is actually dead. And that sucks because it's sad, but it also sucks because John has not been able to blossom into a man. He is getting this wallet under false pretenses. He is still a 13-year-old boy. Now, does John live up to Dad's specific manly expectations? No. John is not traditionally strong, though he does have magic powers, and he does not shave. This is a very critical thing. Dad wants John to shave. That's very important. He never is a mirror to his father. He never looks like his dad. He never really connects with his father in terms of like as a role model. I think John does connect to other certain role models like Colonel Sassacre or his Nana, but he doesn't really connect to his father as a role model. Now, critically, I don't think this is a bad thing. This is not, in the story especially, a bad thing. John finds an alternative to masculinity that suits him, which is, his Johnness, his sort of dorky, plucky attitude. Another character later on who deals with masculinity is Jane. She is treated similarly by her father in spite of being a girl. There's another note to Jane that I won't read, but you all know the note where it says, you lifted the fridge, I'm so proud of you. It's another note in the same style that John got, showing that the dad from both universes are kind of the same guy. In fact, I would call them interchangeable in some ways. To the reader, not to Jane and John, but to the reader. We can look at them the same way is what I'm saying. This is interesting because I was saying before how John does not mirror his father, but Jane, she does mirror her father. She mirrors her dad actually quite a bit. She wears one of his hats. She respects manliness. And in some ways, this is never confirmed, but this is my sort of fan theory, she is more physically strong than John. She runs around more. She lifts more things physically. Again, that's just my own speculation. I think it suits her. She also looks up to the character Ron Swanson, who is a traditionally sort of manly man in the show Community. This amusingly positions manliness as ungendered or unsexed. In other words, masculinity in Homestuck is not something that is necessarily pertains to a single gender. You can be manly and be Jane, who is a girl, or you can be not manly and be John and still be okay. So what it is saying about masculinity in a positivistic sense is that Homestuck is communicating that being manly must foremost be a set of values that are at their core good. So we can understand masculinity in Homestuck as being these sort of manly traits that do not necessarily pertain to being a man in a strict sense. They do not pertain to being, good in any strict sense. They're just a set of values that are an option to live by. And if you think about it in the real world, a lot of people think that masculinity and femininity are some kind of normative, real traits, which is, I think, reductive. Masculinity and femininity can be wielded by men, and they can be wielded by women. There's a very famous book that I recommend anyone read, which is by Leslie Feinberg, who is a professor of gender studies at what the fuck college does she work at? I don't remember what college, but a lot of people think gender studies is this poisonous course, but if you read Female Masculinity by Leslie Feinberg, and I think it's eye-opening in terms of what can be done with gender outside of gender. And what I mean by that is exactly what is happening in Homestuck, is this masculinity that is being exhibited by a woman to great effect, and a masculinity that does not have to be picked up by a man, so to speak. If you treat these values as normative, like, only men can be manly and only women can be feminine, I think that's very reductive to the actual human experience. We all know a sort of bossy woman, maybe they're in charge of something at work, maybe, at a church or something. I can think of a woman who I work with who is like this, but they exhibit a sort of, they're bossy, they take charge, they're very gruff, and even though they're women, they might have masculine traits. And I wouldn't say that they have masculine traits. They might be insulted by that. And I think that's sad because it shows a stigma around these, traits as being gendered. I think it bends the mind a little bit to say that manliness is unsexed, but I think you can see through the characters of Homestuck, or at least maybe people in your life, that this is entirely possible. When I say the word feminine boy, on the other hand, you might think of someone like, a twink or one of those, streamers, the fuck do they call them? Femboys. I don't know if that's a sensitive term, but a lot of men have connected to femininity in some way. They have refused to embrace their masculinity, and so through them we see a male femininity, and that is perfectly acceptable and I think very good. So yeah, the idea that I'm trying to convey is that Homestuck and gender is a little bit deeper than a lot of people think, and I think it's a little more charitable than people think. Homestuck has a lot of hits and it has a lot of misses, but I think for the most part, gender is a hit, a solid hit, at least in my book. The one thing with gender and Homestuck that I want to address that I'm not a fan of is the gendered aspects. And I have more thoughts on that pertaining to real aspects, but I think that's really the only small fumble that Homestuck has. But I can't really hold it against Homestuck because I think, again, Hussey was operating within some kind of idea of symmetry. And gendered classes don't necessarily have to be something that's bad. So yeah, this is also, I appreciate the character of Dad, and I wanted to just briefly touch on that Dad is an underappreciated character, and in Homestuck Alternate Universe, I was very happy to get to expand on him a little more and have him sort of be shown as a sort of patriotic, pro-democracy guy. I don't know. I really enjoyed Dad as a character. I don't really have any more complicated thoughts than that. I like good dads in media because I want to be a parent someday, and I relate to the idea of loving your child even though they might be annoyed with you. I think it's always worth it in the end. So yeah, if you have watched to the end of the video, just comment something like "I love Dad" or something like that to be funny. Yeah, commenting actually helps the algorithm, and I really love to read the comments. I read every single fucking comment that I get, and I'm probably going to do that until the end of time. So I hope you guys have a great day. I hope this was at least a little bit enlightening to you, and I don't know, leave, go home. Good morning, friends. This is Funk McLovin. I've come to you with another semi-scripted video. I wrote some notes here. You can hear my notebook that I wrote this shit down in. Mostly I wrote this stuff down in my notebook at work. And just little thoughts about the hero's journey. Now, I read Joseph Campbell a while ago, and I took a couple classes on Joseph Campbell. And what I'm going to be discussing today is how the hero's journey, or the monomyth, relates to Homestuck. And I want to be very clear. This is a version of the hero's journey that is more related to how it is taught in creative writing than how it is portrayed in the monomyth. So this is less of a historiography of stories and more of a commentary on like how stories are taught out and how to like tell them, if that makes sense. And this is how I kind of wanted to relate Homestuck to the hero's journey and kind of talk about Homestuck as a refutation to a lot of storytelling conventions that are in existence. Something I've always enjoyed about Homestuck is how it eschews the traditional storytelling that is sometimes pushed in creative writing and writing feedback communities. Fiction writing in the Western style is a tradition that dates back to oral stories and epic poems as old as Gilgamesh, and many scholars of these tales have noted similarities between the stories. Famously, Joseph Campbell's monomyth is the basis for many of the famous stories like Star Wars and has been applied to innumerable works from the Odyssey to the Lord of the Rings. But what about Homestuck? Where does this cult favorite fit into the grand tradition of Western literature? Turns out not that well. Joseph Campbell's monomyth is something that is well known to those who write, but for those not in the know, allow me to give you a primer. The Hero with 1,000 Faces is worth a read if you haven't yet, so consider reading it since my summary won't be very in-depth. So basically the hero's journey is, sometimes it's portrayed as like a 12-point system, like a clock. That's how I learned it. There are sometimes other pieces, but generally it's organized as a circle with two halves. One of the halves is the known world, and one of the halves is the unknown world. And the hero traces a clockwise journey around it, first starting in the known world, going into the unknown world, and then returning. Broadly, there is usually a call to adventure, which calls the hero into its the fray, as it were, into this special world. There are archetypical things like the mentor or the magus or whatever you want to call it. There's usually trials and a darkest hour about the halfway point. And there's usually sort of this idea of treasure and a triumphant return. Now, that's like the broadest overview of the hero's journey, and I'm going to get into it more soon. But already there are several problems with applying the hero's journey to Homestuck. There's this idea of the normal world and a fantastical world, but there are actually numerous special worlds in Homestuck, all of which are actually an interconnected network of worlds. There are also numerous points that fit the criteria for many of the plot elements. Are the human's parents, for example, mentors, or is someone like Doc Scratch the mentor, or where in Homestuck is the darkest hour? Game Over is pretty dark, but it occurs very, very far past the midpoint, like it would normally be in a hero's journey. This, of course, is addressed somewhat in Campbell's book. Not every myth or story must adhere closely to the wheel, but Homestuck seems to be a work that does not adhere as much as it possibly can. The largest piece of Homestuck that stymies its analysis is the use of many characters. The book, after all, is the Hero with 1,000 Faces, hero singular. John and Dave and Rose et al. Share the spotlight in many ways, which brings a new dynamic to the monomyth. To turn a phrase, you may call this a multi-myth. John may be our definite protagonist, but to call him a hero in the style of Harry Potter or Gilgamesh would be a misstep. Dave or any other kid or troll goes through many of the same things John does. Swaths of the story are not even about him. The monomyth, of course, is a tool from which many good ideas have been drawn, but Homestuck remixes these elements with very little regard. This highlights some shortcomings of Campbell's style. Homestuck seems to have little regard for most narrative truisms in the modern era, most notably this notion of narrative minimalism. You might have heard advice to the effect of every character conversation should serve two purposes, or don't confuse the reader. But Homestuck constantly disobeys both, not always to its benefit. Homestuck is hard to apply an analytical framework to. This could be for many reasons. Is Homestuck some great quest that doesn't require analysis, or is Homestuck so bad that even the simplest concepts don't apply? Or maybe even the monomyth is total bullshit. Maybe Homestuck is just incompatible. The truth of the matter is none of these options, but the answer lies somewhere in there. The problem of Homestuck, besides its numerical myth problem, is its sheer size, not just in word count but in depth. One part flows into the other so haphazardly, it's hard to say where analysis should begin and end. Further, it was written over such a length of time that, in themes and style, it slowly changes over the course. Ultimately, I don't think Homestuck is bad for not adhering to the analytical framework, and I don't think the monomyth is bad for failing to cover all myths. The way these things interact is how this becomes interesting. I've already used the term multi-myth to describe what's going on here, and I'd like to expand upon that. The project of Campbellian analysis on Homestuck is to stretch the monomyth over Homestuck's narrative, like an unruly bedsheet. Let's just go around the circle here, point by point. I want to talk about Homestuck as it relates to the monomyth in the 12-point style that I learned. Point 0. The ordinary world. There are several such ordinary worlds in Homestuck, starting with the most straightforward, Earth and Earth analogs from the Beta and Alpha timelines. Beta Earth, John's Earth, is a traditionally ordinary world, but the world need not be ordinary from we the reader, but ordinary to the characters. Compare the Alpha, Dirk's Earth, to other dystopias like the Hunger Games, where the world Katniss hails from really sucks. There are other ordinary worlds like Alternia, where the trolls come from, Bephoris, and even the Cherub's prison home. Another facet of Homestuck's ordinary worlds are how they are usually necessarily destroyed by emerging into the fantastical. Number 1, call to action. Just like the ordinary world, there are numerous calls that the characters respond to. For a typical call to action, think of Luke Skywalker's aunt and uncle dying, or Harry Potter's "You're a Wizard, Harry" moment. Homestuck's calls to action mainly come in the form of meteors. It strikes me as interesting that this call to action is in some ways systematized. Instead of personal desire or thematic reasons, Homestuck characters have the thematic reason of not wanting to be killed. Survival-based calls to action are not unheard of. Compare this to Watership Down or The Secret of Nim. They're both stories of critters having to flee because of a higher power. A different call to action exists for Caliborn, but he gets his own section. He's going to be important later. Part 2, Meeting the Mentor. Usually in a Campbellian sense, the mentor is a character who is familiar with the new world and assists the protagonists. Much like the meteors, the mentors are a systemized element of SBURB. Compare sprites such as Dave Sprite and Nana to video game help characters from The Legend of Zelda like Navi, Fi, and Midna. Notably, not all sprites are Campbellian mentors. For instance, Jaspros does not help Rose as much as Nana helps John. We should also consider other mentors such as Terezi for Dave and Vriska for John. Doc Scratch could also be considered a mentor, as the mentor figure is not necessarily good. Some of these mentors also do not coincide neatly with the monomyth's specific mentor order. Part 3, Crossing the Threshold. This part of the monomyth symbolizes crossing into the new world, and the protagonist's first challenge. This could be considered an extension of the call to action section that we've already discussed by entering the medium. In Homestuck, there are numerous thresholds and numerous new worlds to be entered. Compare entering SBURB with exiting SBURB during Cascade. In a sense, Homestuck has many threshold crossings. As worlds become familiar, the characters depart them and find new worlds. This stymies the normal procession of events and changes the monomyth's clock shape into more of like a spiral, I guess. In more typical stories, a threshold would be crossed and delineate two worlds, such as going to Hogwarts in Harry Potter or leaving the Shire in Lord of the Rings. In Homestuck, worlds being left are a nested network, worlds within worlds, literal and symbolic. Act 1. The previous plot points broadly encompass Act 1 of the story structure that is taught in writing classes, particularly screenwriting. This kind of neat category is what Homestuck fights against so strongly when taken as a whole. Many serialized works, when taken as a whole, don't fit into these categories, but usually their individual entries, like episodes or novels, adhere to it in some way. Homestuck is just a massive serialized behemoth, and it's very hard to get your hands around. Part 4. Trials. The next section of the monomyth I consider somewhat squishy. It's more vague than other points, and many events in many stories could fit this criteria. Broadly, Trials represents a descent into the new world and a facing of challenges therein. The character is out of their element. Think of Neo waking up from the Matrix. It's unpleasant and unfamiliar. Homestuck has many such moments. Something that comes to mind is John's arrival in the medium or the brief game accompanying it. He doesn't understand anything yet. Really, Homestuck characters are in a constant state of descending into further depth. Part 5. The Ordeal or the Approach. This is the moment where the protagonist begins to fight actively in some way. It is a moment of proving and progress, but also unsteadiness. Learning is becoming practical. This, like the previous section, is a little vague, and many parts of Homestuck could be analogous. One moment that comes to mind for me is Dave's exploits on the Lohack Stock Exchange. Dave is flexing his muscles and finding success by using his newfound powers. I don't have much to say about this since it's something that sort of is straightforward for people who probably aren't even familiar with this, except for that it is
necessarily coming before misfortune, this part of the story. And the misfortune comes in the form of number 6, the darkest hour. The darkest hour is one of those things that take a good story and turn it into a great one. Without the depths of despair, how can one appreciate victory? In Frank Herbert's original Dune novel and in the 2021 adaptation, the darkest hour comes after the Atreides' house is betrayed. The darkest hour occurs after initial success in Dune, when, they were successful on Dune, and after a great betrayal or some kind of trial goes wrong. Homestuck's traditional darkest hour could be murder stuck or perhaps game over, but neither of these occur at the midpoint of the story. However, they do come after moderate success and before a triumphant moment. Murder stuck happens right before Cascade, and game over happens right before the Vriska-Gram and the whole retcon. Usually Hussey doesn't like to let tragic moments sit there because he doesn't really like to waste much time at all. Between John's fake-out death and his God-tier revival is another point which I could think of as a darkest hour. I don't know if that's pragmatic or hasty or what, but my point is Homestuck is full of darkest hours. Part 7. Treasure. As with many aspects of Campbell's writing, treasure can be but is not always literal. The idea behind treasure is that of symbolic change, or approving of abilities. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, for instance, Harry obtains a sword that gives him new powers. In Star Wars, Luke gets Jedi powers, symbolized through the use of his lightsaber. In ancient myth, the treasure usually was a weapon or some kind of boon. Homestuck has a number of strange artifacts like Cal or the Jujus or the Zilly weapons, but it's hard to classify something as true treasure. The God-tier transformations could also be considered treasure in some sense, giving the players new powers. Part 8. Result and Resolution. Campbell loves these flowery terms and turns of phrase like rescue from without, or death of dreams, or dark night of the soul. But I find this kind of vague language a little meaningless. This stage of the journey usually coincides with what we might call a climax in a traditional sense. Not a climax necessarily in the sense of action, but in the sense of the protagonist's goals. Homestuck has a great many points of climax, but it also eschews climax entirely in some ways. The final act of Homestuck is a relatively short flash animation where the main villain is not defeated on screen. There are numerous times when the reader is actively robbed of a climax when Hussey abruptly cuts to something else. Furthermore, the results of a climax are revealed before the reader even gets to the climax. It's sort of this predestination thing that Hussey likes to do. All of the previous sections, from the trials to the climax or result, constitute Act 2 of the traditional story structure, though some formats consider the Act 2 to end with the lowest point. Whatever the case might be, the Act 2 is the meat of the story. When you hear beginning, middle, and end in like elementary school, the middle part, the most substantial part, is Act 2. If we're really going to stretch Homestuck around the monomyth, we could say Act 1 ends with Cascade and Act 2 ends with Game Over, but this requires a lot of mental effort to sustain. If, for example, we consider John as our hero, he doesn't really do much in the former part of Act 6, which is, in this analysis, Act 2, which makes this fucking confusing to discuss. Side note, Homestuck officially has 7 acts, and there are 7-act frameworks that I have personally used, but Homestuck doesn't really fit well over those. Part number 9. The 9th point sees the hero cross back into the known world after undergoing a change. It's known as the Return. The Return is not always an arrival home like in Lord of the Rings or the Odyssey, but a metaphorical reset of the status quo. In the film Stardust by Neil Gaiman, the protagonist steps into a brand new world over a garden wall and returns only to find he no longer wants to live in the ordinary world at all. He has a new ordinary world, in a sense. In Homestuck, the characters are explicitly creating a brand new world. That is one of the main plot points of Homestuck. Crossing that threshold is reserved for the very, very end. It is something that is brought up early on and is not paid off until the end of the narrative. Part number 10, New Life. If the climax in the story has not occurred earlier, this is where the new climax happens. In the recent Mario movie, for instance, Bowser returns to normal New York City to fight with Mario, and then he's defeated. This section also coincides with resurrection, which is sometimes literal. Resurrection is a central theme in Homestuck, much like New Home is. If you're familiar with falling action in a traditional story structure, you could compare this to that. Point number 11, resolution. Resolution is one of the more self-evident parts of this diagram. It is the part of the story that ties up loose ends. Homestuck obviously does not tie up all of its loose ends. In some ways, Homestuck resolves its plot, and in some ways it does not, as previously discussed. Homestuck's lackluster revolution is the source of mass outrage, especially back in 2016, but most questions were completed or answered in some way, though not always in the final climax itself. And finally, number 12, the status quo. The final point on the circle is the status quo, which brings us back to the beginning. The status quo, like in the beginning of the journey, indicates that normalcy has been achieved and the hero has changed in some way. Harry Potter goes back to the Dursleys, Shrek moves back into the swamp, and the hobbits cross into the great beyond. The climax and resolution of a Campbellian story is generally referred to Act 3 and completes the cycle. Homestuck's Campbellian Act 3 mostly takes up the hasty final moments of the comic during Act 6 and Act 7. You could also split Homestuck into broadly two concentric heroes' journeys. One, Act 1 through 5, and the other outside of it, comprising Act 6. Again, very confusing to talk about a 3-act structure or a hero's journey over something that purports to have 7 acts of wildly varying lengths. But there you go. I hope you understood this to the best of my abilities and to the best of your abilities. So, here's the question. Why? You might be sitting there at home wondering something very important. If Homestuck doesn't adhere to the monomyth journey, why discuss it? There are numerous stories that don't adhere to this structure, such as maybe Romeo and Juliet or like Cloud Atlas or something. But why compare this to Homestuck? Firstly, Homestuck bills itself explicitly as myth. It uses mythological nomenclature and heroes to tell its story, and yet seems to use Joseph Campbell's forms in an intentionally hodgepodge fashion. I don't know if Huss ever actually read Campbell or tried to incorporate its themes, but I find it compelling to use Homestuck as a counterexample to the Joseph Campbell theory. To be clear, I don't think Joseph Campbell is bad or anything, but thinking in a strict theory sense is not always good, and it's good to challenge it sometimes. Joseph Campbell's intent was a project from historical literature, but in practice his work has been used systematically in writing classes across the globe. Homestuck proves that you don't need to use that system to make a compelling narrative. The second reason I bring this up, however, is far, far more interesting. So far, my thesis or premise has been that Homestuck has no direct analog to the hero's journey. I've spent 20 minutes now driving this home, but I lied. There is a hero in Homestuck that fits the monomyth to a fucking T. It's Caliborn. Caliborn lived a solitary life with his sister, Calliope. A boy cursed by his dreadful alter ego, trapped within a compound on a dead world, he yearned for escape. When at last he conquered his sister using a realm within his dreams, he began a quest for power that ended in his own immortality and instrumentality. There's just one problem with comparing Caliborn to the hero's journey. He's the villain. Caliborn's story is the inciting and concluding central incident of all of Homestuck, but when we track his chronological rise to power, a familiar pattern emerges. I'm going to take this time now to compare Caliborn's journey to the hero's journey because I think it's kind of funny, and I think that the mythology of Caliborn is something that is thematic to Homestuck, and it's interesting to see a character going through a hero's journey when he's not the hero at all. So let's start over with the hero's journey once again. Number 0, the ordinary world. Caliborn's wretched existence and yearning to escape is comparable to countless stories. Harry Potter, Beauty and the Beast, Hunger Games, Moana. The list goes on with characters who want to escape a mundane world that they don't feel like they belong in. Number 1, call to action. Caliborn's call to action is of his own make. Occasionally, monomyth heroes undergo a refusal of the call, but not so for him. He conquers his sister through subterfuge and bites off his own leg to escape his shackles, literally. He uses Spurb to enter his broken session. Chess, plotting, and coy spycraft are all tools in his arsenal. All this he uses to subdue an intellectually superior foe in his sister. The call to action is the screaming wanderlust in all of us. Compare his escape to other characters who yearn for more. Again, Belle from Beauty and the Beast, Ariel, really any, Disney princess, really. I'm comparing fucking Caliborn to Disney princesses here. Number 2, meeting the mentor. Caliborn's mentor, as foretold by the ancient prophecy, is Gamzee Makara. Being a former Spurb player, Gamzee offers his help. He's mostly there for moral support, though, acting as Caliborn's punching or shooting bag. In most stories, mentors are more functional and knowledgeable. Think Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars or Haymitch from The Hunger Games. Number 3, crossing the threshold. For Caliborn, crossing the threshold could refer either to crossing into the game or beginning his in-game quest. Also related to his mentor stage, he begins speaking to actually Andrew Hussey, the author, upon his land. Act 1. As discussed before, Act 1 comprises a escape from a known world. Caliborn's escape from Calliope. It is his journey from boy to man, sanctified in blood. To some extent, he is an inversion of the hero's journey in that he is clearly a villain. That's kind of obvious. Why did I write that? In this way, the idea of heroism is criticized. From Caliborn's perspective, he is very heroic, using passive language to discuss the death of his sister to evade the blame for it. This plants a question in the reader's mind. If this behavior can be viewed as heroic, overcoming obstacles, freeing oneself from bondage, then how should we think of other heroes? If a hero isn't inherently good, like Caliborn isn't, then what is heroism? Maybe that guy who killed Medusa isn't that great after all. Heroism is something that Homestuck is skeptical of in general, with other characters like Dirk and Vriska also eschewing traditional heroism. Part 4, Trials. In the shell of the old Earth, Caliborn embarks on his first quest, a quest for keys. He seeks these in order to unlock computer terminals both to talk to Hussey and speak to the Alpha Kids while viewing their progress in the game. He largely views these challenges as kind of idiotic, taunting Hussey. Like many quests, this tests Cal into a new way of thinking. Again, these trials are certainly self-explanatory, and I'm not going to spend too much time explaining them here, but trials is a pretty standard part of any monomyth. Number 5, the ordeal or the approach. Caliborn begins coming into his own. He obtains several boons from his trials, like Lil Cal, Lil Seb, and his crowbar. This represents a change from reactive to active. Not that he wasn't active before, but in terms of his quest, he was just kind of going with the flow, and now he's doing something himself. Compare this to the film Hercules, where the titular hero goes from zero to hero, as the saying goes. Now Caliborn is going from zero to hero. Number 6, the darkest hour. After some time on Dead Earth, Cal uses Gamzee to help unlocking the final terminal, which opens Yaldabaoth, Cal's denizen, and his final challenge. Though mostly off-screen, this first battle with Yaldabaoth ends in Cal's loss and the first break, signifying a change. Caliborn's new quest is the most difficult quest of anyone in Homestuck, a game of pool on a cosmic scale, knocking entire planets into a black hole. Sadly, we only see parts of this quest. There are many stories that feature a first encounter with a foe that ends badly, like with Ganondorf in the video game Ocarina of Time. Caliborn must now embark on a new quest to have another chance to fight. Number 7, treasure. Treasure is a major theme in Cal's story. As discussed, he finds helpful loot like Seb and Lil Cal, but through his pool quest he discovers new allies in the Leprechauns. As discussed before, Cal also goes God tier, which could be considered a treasure. Number 8, result reflection. After completing his pool quest successfully, Cal returns to Earth. Sadly, most of the pool quest happens off-screen, but we can assume it is very arduous and very difficult. This section of the narrative is sometimes the climax, but not always. Compare this section to Star Wars: A New Hope, where the rebels are attacking the Death Star. After the pool quest, Cal returns to Old Earth. Act 2. Cal's Act 2 comprises a moment where he is humbled and undergoes real change to overcome his challenges. Unfortunately, this change makes him worse. Normally in a hero's journey, the change kind of makes them stronger, but Caliborn just gets more set in his ways. There's an old saying, strong men make good times make weak men make bad times, and bad times make strong men. The implication of this pseudo-Hegelian historiography is that strong men are good, and goodness is related to trials or bad times. Caliborn is strong and formed by bad times, but he's a little prick. Bad times and the overcoming of trials are not always a path to goodness. Again, a critique of the hero in Caliborn. Part 9. The Return. Caliborn returns to Earth and unlocks more terminals and finds a how-to-draw manga book. He begins a variety of artistic works based on what he sees in the terminals and constructs Homestuck. He even makes his own OC, a first draft of Lord English. Now that Cal has overcome his challenges, he is becoming a more active character, seeking what he wants. He has come home, but even Odysseus faced challenges back home. Cal is also beset by John Egbert, who is insulted by Homestuck, being a sort of funhouse mirror version of John's own plights. Number 10, New Life. Cal is confronted by John a second time, and the duo fight. In retaliation, Cal constructs his masterpiece, where he plans for a future rematch with John. This is something that, it's a little strange to think of this as the New Life section, because this is not the end of Homestuck, but this is close to the end of Caliborn's story. Part 11, Resolution. At the end of his quest, Cal has another important battle besides with John, his final rematch with Yaldabaoth. After his trials, he was now able to best his denizen, his dragon, his tower, his own Darth Vader or Voldemort. From this success, he gains 2 boons. First is the House Juju, which he uses to later defeat John, and the God Tier Clock. Using one of his very first boons, the Crowbar, he breaks the clock and absorbs its energies, becoming unconditionally immortal, a god beyond a god. After battling again with John and his friends and the Alpha Kids, Cal is conditionally defeated. He is sealed in the Juju by the Alpha Kids. This, of course, is all according to plan. Caliborn's ultimate goal is not only to win, but to make himself immune to losing. When he defeats John, this ensures that he achieves more power. He has achieved a new mode of being entirely after his masterpiece fight. In a very real sense, he is the status quo in which Homestuck occurs. You know what they say, he is already here. Act 3. Caliborn's Act 3 is concerned with ensuring his permanent legacy and dealing with external threats. Caliborn has achieved his goals, and as stated before, he does not even lose within the comic. Act 7 ends upon a cliffhanger. Furthermore, his defeat occurs after the story is over. Caliborn as a hero is obviously a deconstruction of what we usually consider heroic. To himself, he seems like a hero. He overcomes trials and defeats those who don't believe in him, but his trials invariably make him worse. Most heroes go from cowardly to self-actualized, and we understand their journey is positive. But Caliborn becomes a selfish, conniving, childish villain. He quests for power as a matter of self-aggrandizement, and when he obtains it, his worst traits are solidified and enhanced. This occurs frequently in the real world. Power, even when earned, perhaps especially when earned, leads to corruption. A cop, your boss, politicians, what is their attitude towards their lessers? Not everyone becomes a better person when exposed to bad times, and we can see through Cal the dangers of this self-mythology. Hard work doesn't build character. The only thing that will make you good is doing things you believe are good. Caliborn is a real little asshole, and I love him. We all love him. So that's the end of this long-winded thing. Happy 413 to people who are listening on 413. This audio was originally available on my Patreon. I release a lot of sort of navel-gazing stuff on there, like this video. I have some other videos that are there. And I also release them later on YouTube. And I also release some free stuff on my Patreon. So if you are interested, make sure to check out my Patreon if you're not already here. Like, comment, and subscribe if you're listening on YouTube. And of course, thank you for listening very much. And if you are subscribed to my Patreon, thank you. I don't know. I love Caliborn. I've seen a lot of people say that Caliborn is the secret hero of Homestuck, and I think there is a grain of truth in that, and that's what I wanted to discuss in this video. So thank you very much for listening, and goodbye. Hey folks, I'm going to jump right into this. I think that long-winded introductions on videos like this are kind of silly, so I'm just going to fucking get right into it. Tarot. Tarot is a fascinating concept. It's usually associated with fortune telling, but that is not the be-all and end-all of tarot. In fact, tarot is more closely associated with storytelling. You might be familiar with Joseph Campbell's The Hero of Many Faces, or The Hero's Journey, or the monomyth. And tarot has a lot to do with that, as a matter of fact. In fact, Joseph Campbell cannibalized a lot of stuff from the tarot to make his Hero with a Thousand Faces thing. If you want to know more about that, there's a book called Hero of a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. Very good stuff. Draws on Jungian philosophy, which I think is sometimes somewhat woolly, but I like it. It's interesting. If you've played the Persona games, especially Persona 3 and 4, you're probably very familiar with the tarot and how it pertains to stories in maybe a kind of symbolic way. And if you've watched JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, you also know a lot about the tarot, because there's kind of more of a tenuous, shall we say, connection with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but it's still there. Now, what is the tarot, and what are the major arcana? Well, the major arcana, according to the Rider-Waite version of the tarot deck, there are a couple versions of this. The tarot include the following sort of characters and archetypes. 0 is the Fool, 1 is the Magician, 2 is the High Priestess, 3 is the Empress, 4 is the Emperor, 5 is the Hierophant, or sometimes this is known as the Pope. The Lovers is number 6, the Chariot is 7, 8 is Strength or Justice, 9 is the Hermit. Sometimes this is called the Traitor, but I don't like that interpretation, so we'll just call it the Hermit. We have 10 is the Wheel of Fortune. That's pretty universal. Number 11 is Justice. This is also interchangeable with Strength. Number 8 and number 11, Justice and Strength. 12 is the Hanged Man. 13 is Death. 14 is Temperance. 15 is the Devil, or Typhon. I like Typhon. That's very Homestuckian. 17 is, or sorry, I skipped one. 16 is the Tower. 17 is the Star. 18 is the Moon. 19 is the Sun. 20 is Judgment. And 21 is the World. 21 is a very, very important number. We'll get back to that, maybe, if I remember. So why, there's technically 22, but it ends at 21. It starts with the Fool. The Fool is the main arcana of the tarot. And this kind of has a couple different interpretations, but the Fool is kind of the starting point for understanding the tarot. The Fool is your protagonist, the main guy. The Fool represents the naivete of particularly being young. It represents a new journey, and it represents the many pitfalls that a person might be vulnerable to. It would be helpful to look at the art for these, but this is an audio medium, so we can't do that. But I want to talk about how these archetypes pertain to Homestuck and draw some parallels between them. I don't really have a broad purpose for this particular lecture. I just want to introduce the idea of tarot, and I think doing it through Homestuck is a good idea. If you're interested in more, there are a lot of good places to learn about this. My favorite way to learn about tarot is to walk into a magic shop. And if you don't think that your city has a magic shop, you might be fucking wrong, because there are magic shops all over the place. In my city, there's a magic shop called Triple Goddess, and I shit you not, that place is wonderful. I love going in there. It's like a bookstore where, there's crystals and whatnot. But look for a magic shop. Look for like a Reiki in your area. It's worth an outing. But I want to talk about the major arcana. So the Fool we've discussed. That's kind of the starting point. The Fool is the main guy, right? He is the protagonist. And we can understand this. I think obviously the protagonist of Homestuck is John Egbert. He is the protagonist. Like, there are many protagonists in Homestuck. There are many characters of which we take the POV. But he is the character. He is the person who we resonate the most with. He is the person who we are meant to understand as the protagonist in the most ephemeral sense. And I think this is because of his sort of naivete. Rose says at one point, you are our leader because you basically don't know fucking anything, and you have just this, you're full of hope. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. You all remember this. It's where she says, that's why you're our leader, John. And it's later reflected when Dirk says, that's why you're our leader, Jane. Now, John is a great fool. And fool, in this case, does not actually mean like a dumb guy, like we would colloquially know it. The Fool is more like a little adventurer who runs around, and he's very naive about the world, and he learns more, and he undergoes change. That is the main thing. And John Egbert certainly undergoes change. He is the Fool of Homestuck. The next is the Magician. And I think, obviously, the Magician is best interpreted as Doc Scratch, especially in the inverted form. The Magician, or the Magus, or the Magus, I don't really know. He is a dispenser of wisdom. He is sort of a guide to the protagonists on these journeys, and certainly Doc Scratch provides wisdom and guidance. He is the more... He might have once been a fool. You might think of Obi-Wan Kenobi. But in Homestuck, Doc Scratch is a very interesting example of this. Moving on to the High Priestess. Now, the High Priestess is one of the more symbolic ones, also called the Popess. I think Popess is a dumb fucking name, but we're not looking at the Tarot de Marseille. We're looking at the Rider-Waite version. Now, High Priestess symbolizes this sort of mystery, right? It symbolizes this very, like, what's going on? Not everything is as it seems. And I think the best encapsulation of this, especially in early Homestuck, is not actually Rose, but Jade. Jade has a very High Priestessly energy, where she kind of knows more than she lets on, or she doesn't always discuss her inner feelings with her friends, and she is the arbiter of many mysteries. I think Rose could also serve this archetype too, but Rose has a much more active role, and Jade tends to be the more passive character. I like that. The High Priestess, very mysterious. Next is the Empress. The Empress and the Emperor are kind of cards that go together. They represent paternalism and maternalism, respectively. The High Priestess represents a maternal drive, and this means maternal in all of its senses, like a female authority figure. And I think there are a lot of actually female authority figures, but I think the biggest one, obviously, is the Condess. She is the mother of an entire species. Especially in an inverted example of the High Priestess, Condi could represent a maternal influence that is not actually good or nurturing. It could influence, like we might think of her as a wicked stepmother if we see the inverted High Priestess. Or, sorry, Empress, not the High Priestess. Condi fascinates me to no end because she is such a straightforward example in so many ways, because she is literally the mother of a species. She is very matronly in many ways, but she's also just so unique as a character in her disposition and outward demeanor, where she just loves she loves money, she loves stuff, and she wants to, regain her glory and also regain the troll race, but she goes about it in such a direct and funny way. The Emperor, on the other hand, is a paternal influence. And I think this arcana could be shared by Dad and Bro, because Dad is the very straightforward example of the father figure, whereas Bro is an example, again, of the sort of wicked father figure. They contrast each other very nicely, and it suits... like we're talking about, the Fool is John Egbert, then the Emperor is Dad. That's nice. Now, I do really like the reflections between Bro and Dad, and I think the biggest example is how Bro kind of rejects his status as a father. He doesn't want it. It's actually kind of hard to think of him as a father, because he is a authority figure who refuses to acknowledge his own authority. He refuses to have Dave acknowledge his authority. He just kind of passively tries to influence things. It's a very hands-off approach, and a very evil approach, I would say. I don't know. That's the Emperor, very supportive and protective card, and when inverted, like with Bro, it's very painful. Next is number 5, the Hierophant. Or the Pope. Now, Hierophant is one of the most misunderstood arcana, because no one knows what a fucking Hierophant is in the modern day. The closest equivalent is Priest, but that isn't very... It's kind of tenuous. A Hierophant card essentially is about convention and tradition and ritual. You could also think of the Hierophant as a teacher and sort of a querent. And I think a good there's not really many Hierophants in Homestuck. It's kind of hard to draw a connection here, but I like the idea of the Sufferer being a Hierophant. He is a very wise person who tries to influence events and codify something better for his people, and totally, utterly fails, but manages to make an interesting legacy. He is representative of the cyclical nature of especially troll society, but all of Suburb as a whole. And he kind of carries a lot of shit on his back and goes unsung for most of the story. I like that. I don't really have much to say about the Hierophant. Like I said, he's the most misunderstood card, and I won't pretend to understand him much better. The Lovers is another card that, in my mind, is kind of a misnomer. In the Paul Christian version of the tarot, this is called the Two Roads, and I think that's a little better, because the Lovers implies choice. It implies choice, and it implies connection. And so this is less of a person embodied and more of a sort of, like many of the Arcana, a concept. I think the explicit example of the Lovers is the choices that people are given in Homestuck by their denizens, especially the one given to Caliborn by Yaldabaoth. That kind of kickstarts the entire fucking plot of the whole thing. I think in Homestuck, the Lovers would have to be the Dad and Mom, because Dad and Mom represent not only actual literal lovers, but also the choice that John has to make between, like, playing the game and taking it seriously, and also, seeing his fucking dad again. And ultimately, the lovers die, and they kind of that kind of codifies something inside of John, where he has to go on this journey now because Jack Noir kills his fucking parents. The point where Jack Noir kills John and Rose's parents is it's a turning point in Homestuck. It's the first death in the comic other than like the fake out death of John, going God tier, and it kind of changes the tone throughout the whole ordeal. The Chariot is next, and the Chariot is another card that represents a concept more than a person or an item. The Chariot represents forward motion. It represents perseverance, essentially. I mean, if you think of a chariot, you think of it going forward. It's moving towards a destination. And the Chariot is interesting in Homestuck because the forward momentum of Homestuck is kind of hard to define. The Chariot is kind of ill-defined in this work. From an analytical standpoint, we could say that, they could benefit from a stronger presence of the Chariot. But I think the Chariot is best represented by that ship that Vriska rides around the medium. That is kind of the most determined that any character is, where Mina and Vriska and Arani are riding around that area. That's a good Chariot in Homestuck. Next is Strength. Like I said, Strength and Justice are kind of interchangeable. The Rider-Waite version is the only one that has Strength at number 8. But we're going to talk about it here. Now, Strength is an interesting one to me because Strength, it occurs in the middle of the tarot, whether it is in this position or the other position. But Strength is sort of a triumphant conclusion, it's telling me on Google. And I kind of agree with that. But it's in the middle of the tarot, which implies that this triumphant conclusion is in some way incomplete. It is a temporary win. It is a very... If it comes up in the tarot, for instance, that you draw, it would mean like, okay, you're getting over an illness, or maybe a fight with a friend is going to come to an end soon. And that can be very happy, but it's not a systemic card. It's like a Band-Aid card. It says this problem that you're having is going to be gone, but you might still have systemic problems that you have to deal with. Because it's not a very complete card. It is not a spiritual completeness. It is very superficial. And I think this is best represented in Homestuck by the Scratch. The Scratch is the Strength. Because the Scratch is something that the characters are working towards, and it's something that is psychically interesting to the reader. But it is not the systemic finish to your story. It is the middle point of your story. It is the triumph that precedes greater problems. That is what Strength is. Strength, I don't know. It's a very interesting card to me. I like to think about it. Next is the Hermit. The Hermit card is pretty simple. It is one of the most colloquially understood because obviously we still understand the Hermit. Now, early in the story, we might have the Magician, like I said with Obi-Wan Kenobi, who might also be a Hermit. But the Hermit is more often encountered later on in the story, and they are not a companion to the Fool. They're more like the Yoda. They're someone who must be sought after. They're someone who is very lonely, someone who has critical knowledge, someone who essentially tells the Fool, the strength that you seek is within yourself. And I think in Homestuck, the best example of the Hermit is Calliope, where she has a lot of information, but she is also a very lonely and tragic figure. The Hermit is not necessarily lonely and tragic, but I kind of like when it's lonely and tragic, so I like Calliope a lot. Someone that the characters need to seek, who is alone. I think both versions of Calliope could adhere to this, where the first Calliope that we meet is an inverted hermit, where she is actually seeking knowledge from the players, and Calliope later on is more of a hermit herself, the non-inverted hermit. I like it. In one of these, this is called the Traitor. I think that adds a little bit of nuance to the Hermit, because the Hermit's advice is usually not very pleasant. Like we think of Yoda, Luke doesn't exactly follow Yoda's teachings. Luke leaves. He is very impulsive. Or Calliope, we understand as sort of a nefarious person, or someone with a kind of dubious agenda. So the hermit is not always entirely good, but they're necessary. 10 is the Wheel of Fortune, and the Wheel of Fortune is, again, something that's very understood colloquially. Another word for the Wheel of Fortune is the Sphinx, which adds a sort of riddle mystery to it. You know, I wish this was at position number 8, because the Wheel of Fortune is obviously Vriska. The Wheel of Fortune represents sort of just random chance and luck, and Vriska is basically a force of random chance and luck, from her literal powers to the fact that she finds the house juju and all these different things. It's just very fascinating to me how much just random shit happens around her, even after she's dead. Or she is also just randomly happens to be the thing in the retcon that needs to be fixed to fix the entire story. Next is Justice. Justice, like Strength, is a card that has sort of a duality to it, a hidden duality. Justice outwardly is very pleasant. It's like, okay, finally justice is being served. Something is happening. But on the other hand, something is also lost. A bargain is made not with people, but with a cruel universe. And this implies that, like, something must be lost, something must be bargained, something, is happening, something must be sacrificed for your justice that you seek. I think in Homestuck, like I talked about just now, the retcon is an example of a justice. The retcon is very psychically healing. It's nice to see our characters get back, but we also get the sense of something tragic has happened. Something, has had to happen to get here. Jade had to suffer on a 3-year cruise because of the death of John in this new universe. Vriska was never able to be killed and grow as a person. There's a lot of new drama that happens because of this, and it's a good thing, and justice is going to be served to Caliborn, and all that stuff, but it's also not great. Next is the Hanged Man. The Hanged Man is a very, very good card. Hanged does not in this case mean dead. It implies, I don't know what the word would be, surrender. Surrender. Not sacrifice, but surrender. It implies also being suspended in some kind of problem. Think of Luke's... I'm using Star Wars as a reference a lot now that I'm thinking about it. Think of him, he is hanging upside down. He's waiting for that ice creature to come to him, and he's trying to reach for his lightsaber. He is hanged. He is hanging from his foot, and he has no one to rely on but himself. But the Hanged Man also implies that the strength is within you. And he finally, gets the lightsaber from the little pile of snow. Now, the Hanged Man in Homestuck is Dave. He's a great Hanged Man. Because at some point in the story, he chooses to give up his nighttime powers because he sees that they're not good for him. They're not psychically affirming to him. And I like that. It's interesting that I don't know. I like the idea of the Hanged Man as a character, as an archetype, because it so defies like the situation. It is a testament to the human spirit that when we're hung upside down, when we're fucked over, there is still something to be accessed. There is still something to us, and I like that. Next card is Death. And a lot of people love to say that death is like, that's not actually a bad card. It just means that something is going to end. It's going to come to an end. No, it's a bad card. It's a very bad card. It's a nefarious card. If you pull Death, that means that something is going to end, something that you treasure. If you pulled Strength, that would mean the end of a problem or a renewal in conflicts. If you pulled Death, best case scenario is like, okay, you're getting fired from your job. Worst case scenario, you are literally dying. Obviously, tarot is not real, so bear that in mind, but that is the meaning of death. Other names for death are mortality and nothingness, the Skeleton Reaper. This is not a good card. I want to fight back against that conception. It is not a bad card, just a nefarious card. It does not signify good things. Death in Homestuck is obviously Caliborn and Lord English. They represent literal death. They represent narrative death. They represent... they're the angel of double death. I don't have to explain anymore. They're a force of nature. They become a force of nature. Death in Puss in Boots would be a good example of this. They are just a pursuing force. At best, they're playful, and at worst, they're malevolent. They are just there to do a job. They essentially are just a force of nature that has to be reckoned with and kind of played around. It is it's entropy, essentially. And I like that. The next card is Temperance. And I like Temperance because it comes right after Death and right before the Devil, right? Temperance is an inner clarity. It is the calm mind. It is a moment of peace. I like that this one is kind of clumped together with the Hanged Man, the Hermit, Death, and the Devil, because temperance is so often needed in these moments. The best kind of thinking is done under duress, essentially. Temperance implies artistry, it implies creativity, it implies a lot of things, and it also implies, peace. It is an inner peace. It is the final stage of the stages of grief, acceptance. A lot of characters display temperance in Homestuck, but I think the greatest moment of temperance is when Terezi kills Vriska. It doesn't feel good, but it is a moment of clarity that Terezi experiences. She is very sure of herself. And ironically, later, she has to reverse that decision, which I think kind of sucks from a narrative standpoint, but whatever. It is a point of clarity. It does not imply that it is a good thing, but it implies that this is what needs to happen. I like that. It's very clear. I love its determination in Undertale. That's a good example. The next, number 15, is the Devil. The Devil, also called Great Force or Typhon. This is a good card. Now, the Devil is not so much the devil or some kind of evil guy. It also represents the seduction of the material world, right? I like that. The seduction of the material world, visceral pleasures, the 7 deadly sins, that kind of thing. The things that keep us in that cycle of karma, if you know what I mean. Now, the Devil usually refers to a being, but I think the Devil in Homestuck is the planet of Alternia. The planet of Alternia is a ruthless place and does not really allow for a lot of reflection. It doesn't allow for a lot of doing things on your own terms. It requires a lot of survivalist tactics. Sorry, my cat climbed on me. It requires a lot of stuff from you. It changes you into a devil. The denizens of Alternia literally have devil horns. Not literal devil horns, you know what I mean. But the devil in Homestuck is this just great engine that turns people into exploited beings, exploiting others. And I like that. Well, I don't like that for them. I like that thematically. The next is a somewhat contentious card, the Tower. The Tower. The Tower is a very staunch card. It reminds me of Strength and Temperance, where it's something that is very calm and peaceful, but also implies something else. The Tower is danger. It is the goal. It is the Hyrule Castle in in Breath of the Wild. It is the place. It is Mordor. The Tower is Mordor. It is misery. It is the prison. It is the blasted tower in other interpretations. The tower in Homestuck is obviously Skaya. Skaya is the end goal, and it is also the source of so fucking much of the problems of Homestuck. It is sort of the shadow antagonist to the series, and yet it is also the place and the item that can bring them salvation. The tower is this place. I think it so well encapsulates the tower. It's a little bit more ephemeral than like Mordor or the Death Star, but the tower is a wonderful example of this. I love the tower. The next is number 17, the star. I like the star. The star implies a lot. Again, it's kind of a misnomer. One of its other names under the Italia, I don't know how to pronounce that interpretation, is desolation. But desolation in kind of a fun way. The star is a card of peace. I think the star in many ways is the goal of the tarot deck. The moon and the sun are also in there as sort of symbolic things, but the star is the point of denouement. It is the point where the falling action begins. The star is the moment where the Death Star explodes, where the Tower of Mordor falls over. It is the end of your conflict. It is that systemic change that we talked about earlier. It is the end point. It is wonderful. It is what you have been searching for, and it is also a force of great change. The star, in my mind in Homestuck, is the house juju. It is distilled into an artifact, and once it is found, its total meaning is not understood, but it is the artifact that kind of is able to dispel the evil of the story. I like it a lot. It is a very melancholy card because it implies, okay, the story's over, but we're all different now, right? We're seeing that star at the end of the day, and it's cold comfort, and that's interesting. The moon is in my mind, it's kind of misplaced. The moon implies, it occurs after the denouement of the star, but it is kind of it's a duplicitous card. It does not imply evil or nefariousness. It just implies some kind of misunderstanding or illusion that is occurring. It implies something is not what it seems to be. The peace that you have found is not true. And I don't know why. It's kind of misplaced, like I said. It appears at the end of the tarot, I think, to pair it with the sun. In my mind, the moon is represented well by the actual game of Spurb. It is something that is totally illusory. It is something that hides itself, and it is something that hangs over the story, much like the moon hangs over the tarot. The moon is, I don't know, not my favorite card. If I pulled the moon, I don't really know what I'd make of it. Because shit is always never as it seems, right? That's a confusing syntactical sentence. Things are never always what they seem. What I mean by that is, everything is always fucked up. Nothing is ever revelatory, right? The moon is just kind of a boring card to me. If I pulled the moon, I'd be like, I know shit isn't what it seems, dingus. All right, the sun. The sun is very straightforward. The sun is it's just the wind state, the wind condition of the story. It is the happy ending. It is the falling action. It is the happily ever after. It is moving into something greater, moving into another story with better, understanding. It is the final item. Judgment is so often comes after this because the sun is think of it this way: the sun is your win condition, and then judgment comes after. This happens in Undertale, where you kind of finish the story, but then Sans is there to judge you. It's kind of like that. But the sun in Homestuck is Earthsea. Earthsea is this beautiful place where just everyone goes to have a good time. Society is back to normal. A sense of normalcy is made. But the sun also implies that something within you has changed. And that can be good or bad. In The Lord of the Rings, it's kind of bad and melancholy because you have to, go live with the elves because you can no longer be part of the world. In Star Wars, it's good because it means a return to normalcy. It can be good or bad, but it implies that a change has occurred, and it's nice. Next is Judgment. And Judgment is a somewhat scary card, but it doesn't have to be. Judgment is essentially new beginnings, right? If the sun is the end, then judgment is where you say, okay, something's going to start anew. It implies the beginning of a new journey that you have are able to go on with your new knowledge. You are no longer a fool. You must go into the world, and judgment is essentially saying to you, are you good enough? Are you going to stack up to this new challenges of this world? Judgment, again, on Earthsea, the challenge of the new gods to like become the new rulers of this place. I think judgment could have been explored more in HS2 if HS2 was lived up to its potential, but that is what judgment is. I like judgment. It is one of those cards that has a lot to bite into. Next is the world. And the world could also be interpreted as everything, or the voyage, or the universe. It's also called time. Now, the world is kind of the entire story encapsulated. The world is your holistic story. And it also represents a cyclical nature where, okay, this story is done. The fool has completed his journey. The fool has been judged. And the fool can now embark on a different journey with different magi, with different things of that nature. A lot of sequels underline the essence of the world. Like I said, it has to do with time. And I think that the entire narrative of Homestuck can be encapsulated in the world, or the idea of paradox space. This place, this setting, but also this sort of symbolic interpretation of just narrative. The world is kind of a meta card. And for fans of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, it's kind of a meta ability where you can stop time. It's very, very strange. I like the world. It is a card that is very meaningless out of context. And it sort of forces you to take stock of everything that has just happened, the journey you have made, and kind of retrace your steps through what happened. And it makes you realize like what has changed, what has stayed the same, and what will always be. And that is the journey through the tarot through the lens of Homestuck. Now, this will not help you, read your tarot cards or whatever. If you're looking for more esoterica, I might make more videos about this in the future. But the point of this was basically to get you to think about stories and archetypes and how maybe this gave you an idea for your own story. Maybe it gave you an idea for your own life. But in my mind, tarot cards bridge the gap between a story and the real world and the sort of stories that we are necessarily telling each other and ourselves all the time. Because you kind of think about like, okay, this story is Luke Skywalker. He is the fool. But I am also the fool of my own journey. I am a fool in my own life. And I want to identify these things in my life. So it's like I said, the bridge between narrative and real world. That's a very pretentious way to put it. I don't think that this is like a real study in psychology or like, reality, but it's good to think about. And there's a reason that these symbols have persisted for as long as they have. I hope you got something out of this. I don't know if I did, but if you did, that's wonderful. I like to make these. I'll probably put this up on Patreon and then YouTube later, so see you later. Hello everybody, this is Funk McLovin with another Patreon exclusive video. Oh, I'm sorry, this is not a video, this is an audio file. If you're listening to this later on YouTube, then consider listening to this while you're cleaning or driving or doing something else. I want to talk about the politics of Homestuck. And politics is a very broad term, and I think you could approach this from any angle, but I want to approach this from the angle of Homestuck and anti-authoritarianism. Now, anti-authoritarianism is by no means a new concept, especially in Western literature. However, I think Homestuck's anti-authoritarian message is very well thought out, surprisingly. I don't necessarily know if it's well executed, but I think there's a lot here that we can sort of learn from. Specifically, I want to talk about the historical context that Homestuck released during. Homestuck was released during the Obama administration when liberalism, and I'm talking about formal liberalism in terms of the sort of Reaganite capitalist small government liberalism, was sliding out of fashion, especially in the Democratic Party. Liberalism, broadly speaking, could be defined as a policy of fiscal conservatism and social progressivism optional. Nowadays, we see liberalism acted out through the Republican and Democrat Party in the U.S., with one wing of the liberals, the Democrats, who essentially want to have, means testing and a lot of guardrails around social programs, but they're still in favor of social programs nominally. And then we have the moderate Republicans who would consider themselves liberals, who are more in favor of small government, laissez-faire, proto-libertarian, who basically consider, we just need to sort of pull the levers and keep this thing going. The Democrats in America are pro-capital and pro-regulation. This is in contrast with other working class parties like the UK Labour Party, which you can actually be a part of. You cannot be part of the Democratic Party in the same way you can be part of the UK Labour Party. Progressives also contrast with the modern Democrats. This is, the 1900s Democrats or the FDR style sort of social welfare programs for the betterment of society-style Democrats. Bill Clinton was the first real liberal president. A lot of people want to cite Reagan. I think he was more of a libertarian. The difference is pretty nominal, not nominal, but pretty negligible. But Bill Clinton, to me, heralded this post-Reagan response. Why do people dislike liberals, and why are they involved in Homestuck? The Republicans in the U.S. are more traditionally laissez-faire and had libertarian sentiments, and Democratic voters began to have oppositions to their party ideology. This created a lot of tension in both parties. There were a lot of people who were no longer felt they were represented by these parties. Democrats seemed anti-union as opposed to how they were perceived before. They were anti-labor, and they let down certain equal rights causes, such as the gay rights movement in the early 2000s and the trans movement today. This skepticism is reflected in Homestuck, mostly through ironic detachments from Obama, as well as, surprisingly, the planet before us. Next, I want to talk about a little bit of Homestuck and the internet, because I think Homestuck's ideology is mired in the politics of the internet of the especially late 2000s. In the wake of Obama, there were different reactions to the narrowing of politics. There were two main reactions to this, 4chan and Tumblr. And if you're more interested in the 4chan-Tumblr dichotomy, which sounds kind of like a conspiracy theory, but there's a lot of compelling literature about it. There's a book called Kill All Normies by Angela Nagel, and there's a book called Trust the Plan by Will Sommer, which covers the QAnon movement. They both talk about how just deeply the internet affected politics the world over. And it's kind of upsetting to realize that the internet is so influential in politics, especially in the early days. 4chan's response to liberalism was essentially to turn away from democratic political correctness and identity politics, and they embraced inflammatory ideologies, like on the Poll Politically Incorrect board and R9K, which is sort of an edgy, board. Don't go there. you see a lot of Reddit atheists migrating to this 4chan style of new politics, where they have a politics of irreverence at any cost. So you have them purporting Nazi ideologies, probably in earnest, but part of the reason they do that is because they think it is inflammatory and therefore good. They've replaced their sort of locus of quality with a locus of, crudeness. I think that's interesting. Tumblr was the polar opposite. They embraced identity politics entirely and a style of leftism with more emphasis on humanism and equity than historical leftist movements focusing on labor. They were militantly in favor of intersectionalism. And for all the good that intersectionalism does, I think there is a lot of skepticism worth having of identity politics and how it is used against people as a cudgel instead of to lift people up. For instance, identity politics is mostly invoked not when someone is being an exemplar or someone needs help, but when you need to bring someone down by saying you're marginalizing this group by doing X, Y, and Z. And in some cases that's correct, but I think any culture that talks about the be-all and end-all of their identity is identity politics, then you don't really have a solid basis for solidarity. My opinion is the socialist opinion, which is I do believe in intersectionality, and I think that intersectionality, in fact, is one of the most important axes of control, but intersectionality, the most important intersection, if you will, is labor, because labor is what actually moves the needle on anything, and labor is inherently sort of anti-authoritarian, as we'll get into more later. Both groups, the 4chan and Tumblr guys, were lampooned in Homestuck during the open-bound sections with a parody of Tumblr, and the trolls were originally sort of this pastiche of Something Awful guys. They were also the troll archetype. I want to be specific, is more like honed in on a very specific subgenre, not subgenre, but subcommunity of people that Hussey was part of. And he kind of opened it up with the Before Us trolls to be just about Tumblr in general. Each Before Us troll, we can see a point of view on the political aims of the day. Before Us and liberalism. One of my good friends called Before Us a liberal hellhole, and I can think of no better summation than that, frankly. Every single bugbear of the overbearing and ineffectual nanny state is taken to its logical conclusion. The Democrats rule the world on Before Us, and it's horrible. Alternia could be called a fascist dictatorship underneath the absentee empress, but Before Us is a little more poignant. Alternia is anti-authoritarian in that it just shows a horrible world under an authoritarian ruler, which is not very difficult. Most dystopian books do this without, a lot of trouble. But Before Us is more interesting in the nuance of it. And I want to get into that in some specific characters, and I want to give a little time to each of them. I can't get into all of them. I think that would broaden the scope of this too much, being an informal speech or lecture or whatever the hell you want to call this. But the first one I want to talk about is Cankry, because Cankry is probably one of the most fascinating Before Us trolls to me. Actually, before I get into the Before Us trolls, I want to make a little disclaimer. I think a lot of people dislike the Before Us trolls because they're more outwardly unpleasant and they have less screen time than the regular trolls, or they feel like bit characters. But I think if you give them a chance, not necessarily like them, you don't have to like them, but if you give them a chance, you might find something that you enjoy, or you might find one of them that you actually like. I used to be a hater until my very good friend Mio got me into the Mean Cree ship. Shout out to Mean Cree. So first I want to talk about Cankry. Cankry is a mutant blood. On Alternia, this means that Karkat would have been hunted and killed, but on Bephoris, his condition, in spite of having no negative physiological effects that we can see, places him in the culling program, where he is forced into a lower class. This leaves him not empowered, but incredibly neurotic and sanctimonious, where he's preaching about and tone policing others. This is what I was talking about before with this notion of identity politics. It is a condition of learned helplessness. It is a learned helplessness through entire disenfranchisement. It is the world telling you you are helpless over and over and stopping you from doing anything dangerous. Cancri has accepted his conditions, and as such, his revolutionary sentiment that he expressed as the signless in the Alternian universe is totally quashed. I think that's interesting. Someone who has accepted his condition of helplessness through what he perceives as political awareness. And I think, to be fair to Cancri, a lot of his speeches show a great deal of rationalization and rhetoric towards plights of his fellow trolls on Bephoris. The problem is, he is not doing these sermons for the benefit of others. He's doing it for the benefit of himself, and we'll get into that later with another character. The next character I want to talk about is Arania. Arania is probably the second most well-known Bephoris character, one of two that kind of matter in the grand scheme of things. And I'm not actually going to talk about Mina in this video. I don't think I wrote any notes on her. Hang on. No, I think I talk about her during the Condes. But Arania represents what is called the professional managerial class, the PMC. The PMC is understood in modern analysis as a sort of stand-in for the bourgeoisie class who still gets paid wage labor. They are these stooges and cronies for the bourgeois class. Now, Arania, she represents your average PMC stooge. Your middle manager, your kind of bank guy, someone who works for a hedge fund, some financier or lawyer or some motherfucker. And she benefits from the system, but she wishes to launder her participation through virtue signaling. A lot of people on Tumblr realized that they were part of a group that was considered oppressive, or they were participating in something that was, reprehensible by the standards of their peers, and they tried to launder that in a lot of ways. For instance, you saw a lot of white people on Tumblr trying to launder their whiteness through either finding some tiny percentage of Indian in their blood or whatever, or, they're trying to be pick-me's. They're trying to be like, okay, I'm white, but I'm not like those other whites. And it's totally fucking disingenuous. It's like trying to launder your own reputation. It's unserious. And this is what virtue signaling originally meant before it was co-opted by right-wing motherfuckers. But Arania and her PMC reflections, they have a vested interest in the status quo. And listen, if you're listening to this and you hear the word vested interest in the status quo, you're probably thinking, that sucks. This is underlined in how cruel and superior Arania acts when she lets go of her morality. She's pretty put together until she meets Vriska and abandons her sense of morality and basically says, yeah, I am superior. I'm going to start enacting my will on others. And this is what is at the center of the PMC ideology. They want to be superior. They want to be the recipients of privilege, but they feel they must launder it somehow. There are a couple legacy publications that are kind of PMC, like writers like David Brooks or career feminists like Hillary Clinton. They seem to believe that the project of equity is over, and they are the stewards of privilege. They believe fundamentally that privilege is good, and they believe that because they have privilege. And, there are a lot of writers like Will Menaker and I can actually only think of Will Menaker because my brain is fucking poisonous, but who abandon their sort of inborn PMC nature and advocate for equity. But there's a lot of people who just really just fucking want to, they want to let you know that they're one of the good ones. The critique of Arania seems to be that these career libs are transparently selfish, transparently guileless. They're the worst combination of a self-aggrandizing and moronic, and they can be seen from any walk of life, basically. The next character I want to talk about is Cronus. And this might shock some people for me to say, but I think Cronus is sort of another lesser side of Arania. They have a lot of parallels, these two. She represents the opportunist of fortune, someone who is born into a fortunate position and wants to launder their superiority. Whereas Cronus, his aims are much simpler, much more straightforward, and I almost say more human. And I want to talk about him specifically because I've known a lot of people like Cronus. Cronus mires himself in the talking points du jour. He knows everything that Porum and Cancri are saying to him, and he attempts to cash in on this goodwill by reflecting this, by basically, virtue signaling to the max. He says he's a kin in Homestuck, and kin at that time especially was sort of understood as this group of people who had a lot of prejudice against them. I don't know anything about kin. I don't want anyone to jump down my ass about this, so I'm going to say as little as I can as possible for fear of putting my foot in my mouth. But kin was something that you could say you were to sort of get out of jail, in a sense. And Cronus invoking this to launder his own reputation to try to get pussy is very apt. I think the irony of of Cronus, the irony of Cronus is that, unlike Arania, he is not privileged in the PMC sense. He is privileged before in society because he's a sea dweller, and sea dwellers are on top of before in society. But I think if he explored his actual gender, or if he did some circumspect, he might find actual friends or his own identity if he engaged in these things in earnest. I think there's a kernel of like some kind of marginal, LGBT, trans, whatever, in a lot of these fuckboys. Nowadays, you'd call these guys the dangly earring he, theys. And I think that what sucks about those guys is that if they just pushed a little harder, they might be, actually these kind of things. They might have an actual identity that's worth relating to, but they don't. There are many men like Cronus in real life. You all know a Cronus. This is why Cronus is so uniquely hated, because he hits on something that's so ubiquitous. And I love Cronus, unironically. Shout out to Yo, It's Crow. Next one I want to talk about is Porum. And Porum is a fan favorite of my friends, so shout outs to Porum. I had to talk about her. Porum, unlike her contemporaries, actually seems invested in social justice. And on Tumblr, these would be called SJWs, but she is an actual social justice warrior. She seems actually invested in doing things. She, unlike Cancri, seems to believe in what she preaches. She is doing it for constructive ends, or what she believes are constructive ends. She comes off as sanctimonious to her friends, but her positions and ideas are very well thought out and put together. Porum reflects on the no bullshit progressive that permeates all of social media. They're uninterested in optics, they're uninterested in personal reputation, and she is a living embodiment of what she preaches. Hussey positions her as one of the few people who actually knows what's going on. She talks about Lord English's shadow patriarchy, and she ends up being entirely correct, even though everyone in the story thinks she's fucking crazy. Because shadow patriarchy sounds like a conspiracy theory. I think it's hilarious. Tragically, though, since Porum is disenfranchised as a mid-blooded alternate, or a mid-blooded Beforean, she is alienated from a lot of her society. She, unlike Mina or Arania, is not in a position of meaningful change. And so she is forced to take a back seat. She is forced to be a participant in their schemes. And though she is very principled and seems to know what she's talking about, she has no actual usable power. She also seems aloof to a lot of these efforts. She seems to have been ground down by this society she's in. It's almost like she's jaded, if you will. One of the final characters I want to talk about is the Condess. Actually, the final character I want to talk about, because the Condess is the one character that we can talk about from Alternia that influences Before Us and, reflects not liberalism, but sort of authoritarian fascism. In terms of formal government and not just political commentary, her Imperious Condescension is our view into politics. Her Imperious Condescension is obviously a stand-in for fascism or authoritarianism, made explicit by her many, many comparisons to Hitler. Fascism to the trolls is entirely normal, but goes somewhat underexplored in Homestuck proper. Still, through the Imperious Condescension, we see a version of dictatorial fascism based on a caste system. And caste systems, to be clear, are still used today. India has a very big problem with caste systems. Through the depiction is not complex, Hussey seems to be expressing the arbitrary nature of most systems of prejudice. The hemospectrum is a system of oppression based on the color of a troll's blood, something that you could argue is even more superficial than real-world systems of oppression based on, for instance, skin color or nationality. We as the reader are supposed to look at this society and say, wow, that's cruel and stupid, and then look at our society and see what kind of overlaps with it, which is, a surprising amount. It's not very complex, as I said at the beginning, but I think it's worth thinking about how Hussey kind of just, every authority he is very skeptical of in Homestuck, and I think that's interesting. The politics... Oh, great. Man, I got through the whole thing without yawning or coughing or anything. Damn. This is all one take, by the way. The politics of Homestuck, when seldom they appear, all gesture towards a central theme. The people in power are cruel weirdos who are just as fucked up as anyone else. The Empress shits just like the rest of us. And I think that is a worthwhile political message to portray, and I think that it being uncomplicated actually reinforces it quite a bit. I don't think you really need a complicated critique of fascism. I think that we very luckily live in an era where most people are skeptical of fascism. And most people, when they see people preaching about actual Nazis and Italian-style fascism or whatever it might be, they rightfully call it out. And as for the liberal stuff with the Beforeign trolls, I think that Hussey is kind of overcritical of a group of people who doesn't really have any political power. I don't know if he's vindictive or not. It's hard to say how vindictive Hussey is at any given time because he tries to appear as aloof, but also relentlessly mocks everyone who likes his work. So I don't really know what his actual opinions of Tumblr politics are. But I think that the Beforeign trolls are certainly a very accurate insight into what was going on those websites at the time. I could have gone more in depth about Tumblr and how it was, but I don't want to because this has gone on for 30 fucking minutes and I've been talking for 30 minutes straight. What I want to emphasize, though, is every piece of literature or every piece of art has some kind of politics. We like to think about politics as being absent from things as a function of being confronted by something. But some of the best works of fiction, like Spec Ops The Line, or I should have thought of another example before I said that sentence, but a lot of political stuff is very good. Or Brave New World, that's another one. That's a good book. That's very political. A very political game is BioShock. Those are very political, and people love them because they are not confronted by it. They're invited in by it. So I urge you to think of politics not as something to be avoided, but just another avenue of analysis. So, if this made anyone smarter, did it by accident, did not mean to do that, I'm so sorry. And if it made anyone stupider, thank the fucking Lord. I hope you enjoyed this ranting diatribe about the politics of a dead webcomic. But I might do a follow-up on the politics of HS2. I'm kind of reticent to do that because it's not over yet, and I don't really know where it's going. It still seems like it's in the beginning phases of it, even though a whole new team took it over. So I do not really know. I have no idea what the scope of it is, so until I see the whole thing, I'm not really comfortable making a video. Thank you for listening. I hope you have an excellent day. And I hope you do not die by firing squad tomorrow. Goodbye.
All right, if you somehow made it to the end of this 3-hour monstrosity intact and locked in, then I hope you visit Sonic Lux's Etsy store, like I said at the beginning, soniclux.etsy.com. And I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Revisiting my old stuff is very fun. I think I have a lot to say on other pieces of media. And it's nice to kind of clear out my back catalog. If you're interested in submitting or subscribing to my Patreon, then, patreon.com/punkmclovin, whatever, goodbye. If anyone is at the end of this, then I'll give you a little treat. I'll tell you a secret that I've never told anyone. I'll tell you a little Funk McLovin secret. Let me think of one. Let's see. I'm the same age as the Beta Kids. I was born in 1995. So, there you go. There's your fact. I don't know if I've ever told anyone that. I think my birthday was on my Twitter, but who knows.